All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're ready to get started for today's regular meeting of the Bellevue School District Board of Directors. Today is Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021. We were trying some new technology here to get our meeting going along, and so hopefully we'll be able to make up that time. We'll start with roll call. My name is Francine Wiest.
Christine Chu. Erica Malif.
Seema Sarafan.
Eva Collins.
Great, and Director Watson will be joining us shortly, and we'll announce when she arrives. So with that brings us to the Pledge of Allegiance. Director Malif, will you please lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, and Director Chu will lead us in the land acknowledgement.
We acknowledge, honor, and respect that our broad community of Bellevue School District students, families, educators, and staff live and learn on the traditional indigenous land of the Coast Salish peoples. We thank the caretakers of this land who have lived here and continue to do so since time immemorial.
Thank you. And that brings us to the acknowledgements that we went through in more detail at our first June meeting. I hope everyone's had a chance to look those over. LGBTQ Pride Month, Loving Day, Flag Day, Juneteenth, and then what's not listed there, but on many minds, today was the last official day of the 2021 academic school year for the Bellevue School District. Should we give a round of applause? All right, and that is really in recognition for everyone in the district. We know it was a year unlike any other, and our students rose to the occasion, our educators and staff rose to the occasion, central office rose to the occasion, families rose to the occasion. It was difficult. They know the repercussions aren't over for it yet, but we are looking ahead with such enthusiasm for the coming year, after, of course, a deserved break for most and many in the coming months. So with that, we'll get to the rest of our meeting, but thank you to everyone for all the efforts for this past year. Item 1.5 is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, the agenda passes. That brings us to the superintendent update. Superintendent Collins.
Thank you. As you said, today is the last day of school, and for a year that started with so many challenges, we're really pleased that we're able to end with so many joyous ceremonies, including our students who are ceremoniously moving from one level to the next. For example, our 5th graders, our 8th graders going on to high school, and our seniors with graduations. We've already completed a number of graduations. We have 4 more graduations, so we are excited to send off the last 4 groups of seniors at T-Mobile Park on this Friday, and we're pleased that we can do that in person. I wanted to share with you an update on bargaining that we have been bargaining with BEA last week, and we're continuing, and I'm extremely pleased with the progress that we've made. It's been very positive and productive, and we will continue to talk. Tomorrow we have another meeting scheduled, and I feel that we're just making tremendous progress and feel good about it. Mainly, we are working on some of the health and safety concerns and making sure that our folks feel very taken care of as they return in the fall. We are still planning on the full return in the fall, so no worries about that. I also would like to introduce our new chief, I want to say this correctly, our official Chief of Communications and Engagement Officer, Janine Thorne. Janine is right back here, and we are so pleased that she's joining our team. Janine is a marketing communications professional. She's for over 15 years in education, and she has vast experience building communication processes. We acquired her on loan from Puget Sound BSD, and turns out she really liked us and we really liked her, and so we decided it was a match, and she agreed to stay with us permanently, so we're thrilled to have her on board. She'll be spending the next several weeks developing and building out the communications department, so welcome, Janine. I'm also pleased to have Dr. Jarvis here. Our interim superintendent is back here, and he drove up from Tacoma tonight to just be here with all of us and celebrate this last day of school and this final school board meeting of the school year. He has been transitioning with us, learning, listening, and preparing to serve as interim superintendent for the upcoming year, and I've just been thrilled to work with him. So welcome, Dr. Jarvis. Thank you.
All right, directors, are there any questions?
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
I would just like to acknowledge that this is Eva Collins' last meeting as our acting superintendent, and I just want to say thank you for the work that you've done, for stepping in so quickly and smoothly, and for carrying us through with your leadership, your passion, and your dedication. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the work that you've done this year.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
All right, I'll echo that, and I have a service pin to present to you, but I was going to give it to you next time. So at the end of your service as acting superintendent. So anyone else?
I'll just echo what Christine said. Thank you so much. It's been, you've demonstrated real grace under a lot of pressure in the last couple of months, and we really appreciate your stepping in so quickly and seamlessly.
Agree. I just couldn't thank you more. Thank you.
All right, anything else under superintendent update, which includes the end of the year, summer school and resources and fall planning? Is there anything else there?
One quick question about summer school.
Yes.
Since we know that there are a lot of kids were concerned about whether or not they got everything they needed, have we been able to provide services to all who applied to us, or to find solutions for any we couldn't serve for summer?
Interestingly enough, we've had a large number of kids our families have been declining summer school. We have reached out and offered, and so we just continue to go down the rank list and offer, and so we have been able to serve any who have been interested to date.
Anything else?
We're just hearing a lot of families say, they weren't able to take a vacation really last summer, and they're looking forward to a break.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, okay, now I got two. Okay, thank you all. Yeah, I just want to also say that just like I talked about when we did the summer school, we're looking at how we can repurpose those layers of mitigating measures that we had for the summer to continue the objective that we had with the summer school programming. So how can we accelerate again? So I know we had talked that there are some pieces in the plan around tutoring and things like that, but if we need to, we'll modify and adjust based around who we're seeing, but we are getting just a large number of folks who are saying, I can finally go somewhere, I'm taking the summer off. So we'll find new layers of mitigating measures for that.
All right, anything else? I'll just make one comment. I do appreciate, as much as we said it's the last day of school, that we have the summer school going on, and then still ongoing plans and planning and work for the fall that's already been going on for several months and is continuing to go on, so that our students can start in person, full-time in the fall. So really appreciate all the work that's going into that with the district, with our labor partners. We know that many people will be on vacation and breaks throughout the summer, but we do intend to reach out and to do those meetings as individual directors in conjunction with district staff, and of course supporting the district staff in whatever ways we can as well in getting that done. So we really appreciate all of that. So that brings us to our next item, and we've caught up on time. And I will note for directors so that it's clear, because I think you're seeing it for the first time. For those listening, I have this timer that will be green, set to the time that we want. It should flash yellow at the couple of minutes before time is up. And so at that point, if you feel like you need more time, that would be the time to motion to extend time. And then there's another timer over there that we'll be using for public comment, but as well, as much as I can remember to do it, it will also count up. Well, maybe not now. So you get a sense of how much time we're each talking. Okay, so that's that. So item 3.
Can you, is it possible to shut off the beeping on when that starts and stops so that we don't hear that every single time someone's trying to converse?
I noticed that, and I'm not sure I can, but I will try. It may not happen quite yet. It might happen at the break. Okay, so item 3, Superintendent Collins, do we have someone presenting the construction-related change orders?
Yeah, this is Jack McLeod. I'll be taking care of this item.
Thank you.
Here tonight, seeking approval of resolution number 2021-06 as shown in Exhibit 14A, certifying the completion of Wilburton Elementary School construction project, and that be adopted by the Board of Directors. To comply with the Washington State Legislature acceptance requirements, the board is asked to adopt the resolution accepting both the final commissioning report by Welsh Commissioning Group as reviewed and the Wilburton Elementary School project as complete based on the recommendation of the project architect, BLRB Architects. As you're aware, commissioning is a systematic process of documentation and verification to demonstrate that building mechanical systems have been installed and function properly, efficiently, and can be maintained in accordance with the contract documents in order to satisfy the district's operational requirements. And so again, we are seeking approval of resolution number 2021-06, the final commissioning report and final acceptance letter from architect.
So we'll take some, so I'm going to move that we accept it and second it, and then we can have discussion. Is there a second? Second. All right, so moved and seconded. Discussion, questions or comments? Director Chu.
One comment and one question. On a comment side, I just want to remind everyone and acknowledge deep gratitude to our community, without whom we would never have the resources to be able to construct these gorgeous buildings that are serving our students and providing all these opportunities for them. So I just want to say thank you and make sure that we all remember how important our community has been in contributing to these things. And then secondly, I just want to ask Jack about the building. Officially, everything is fine and all set. Are there any residual pieces of feedback from our staff, the leadership in the building, the teachers, the other staff in the building, or from the families or students about things that are still a little bit rocky or could maybe be improved a little bit over time? Maybe they don't keep us from saying the job is done, but there's just a little thing that needs a little attention. I just want to make sure that we're all aware of anything that needs additional attention at some point.
There have been very few work orders or any kind of warranty related items that have come through for this. So all of our reviews have been positive. The building has been completed per the contract documents, and again, the delay in getting this one approved has been with the city required boardwalk, which is the sidewalk on the west side of 124th. And then there was also the need for an access to the Seattle City Light power distribution tower. And so there's a couple of elements in there that were really out of our control to get approved and get consent letters from Seattle City Light. But we finally got that wrapped up after seemingly months. The other part of your question, though, is also, again, without having students in school and the rest of it, it's been a little bit of a break between the new school getting going and then having a break in there without having students and staff involved. So, but everything that we've heard so far has been very, very complimentary, and that the school is serving the needs very, very well.
All right. Any other comments, questions?
I would just suggest, I just want to make sure that there will be resources available, since we weren't in the building full time. If anything comes up, that we would still have access to some level of resources to make any adjustments that were critical if they come up.
Yeah, I would add on that the 2-year warranty of all components in the building begins with your acceptance of this resolution this evening. So the 2-year warranty clock starts tonight if this resolution is approved. So yeah, we'll have several years to go ahead and make sure that everything is fine-tuned and any little bugs and details worked out.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, all those in favor of the resolution?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, motion carries. The resolution is adopted. Thank you. That brings us to item 4, public comment. All right. Part of our policy 1400 is suspended. We'll be doing the first reading on that, but in the meantime, let me know that although public comment is not required by the Open Public Meetings Act, the board recognizes the value of public comment on educational issues and the importance of involving members of the public. Public comments should be addressed to the board. Public comments are not intended to be a forum for public discourse, but rather an opportunity to provide information relevant to the board's work. Board directors read all public comments received to board@bsd405.org. Note that portions of policy 1400 have been suspended, secondary to COVID protocols, and additionally, the section on types of comments is suspended as it is out of date and is being revised. While we request that comments avoid harassing or derogatory remarks, please be aware for those listening that while a district value is respect, an open forum allows commenters latitude in their expression. There will be a visual cue when we move on to the next agenda item. The board generally does not respond to comments directly during the meetings, as this could result in a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act. Commenters will have 2 minutes. Do we have a list of commenters? All right, Michael Pierce.
Well, thank you for having me. I take great pride in getting to work with my grandson, who's a senior at Newport High. I was educated as a historian and political scientist, so when civics and government history come up, it's fun to get to work with him. A lot of the current events, I'm an old man, so I lived them. And sometimes he gets assignments, and I look at him, and it's a little hard for me to accept them. But an assignment he recently got is why I'm here before you, his senior class. Let me read quickly to you. This report is about the United States and what should be done from human rights from now on. The last president was called Donald Trump. He caused many problems for human rights. He helped take many children away from their families. He did not stop the police from treating some people badly. Police often treat black and brown people badly. He helped to sell weapons to countries that have done bad things to people. President Trump of the United States often worked against human rights. President Trump of the United States made it harder for many people to make choices about their bodies, sex, and having children. This to me doesn't sound like a government class at all. This is something to destroy a person. Politics aside, I'm not interested in how people feel about the last administration or this administration or any administration. But this to me is not something we ought to be teaching our kids. And so I have 2 questions for you, really. First is this something that the teacher did by herself without supervision? Is it something that a rogue principal has begun to teach in Newport? Or is this representative of what you want taught in the class? And my second question for you is, what is our philosophy here? Are we trying to teach people how to think, or are we trying to teach them what to think?
I'm not sure if you heard at the beginning that we don't usually answer. We listen and take in at public comment.
Thank you for your comment. Next, Sue Huynh. And if, in the interest of time, we have only 10 minutes allotted for public comment. If you see your next, just start coming up, getting ready. Just allow for physical distancing. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I don't mean to be ruining your stuff here. My name is Sue, and I am a first-time parent. So please forgive my ignorance as well as my clumsiness here. I understand that the BEA and the BSD partnered together to determine the school calendar. I'm curious why the kindergartners will start on Friday, September 3rd, then have a 4-day weekend before resuming on Wednesday, September 8th. My 5-year-old is extremely shy and anxious about changes, and kindergarten, as you can appreciate, is a huge, huge change. It's been a source of nerves and emotional stress, which is weighing her and us down. We've been trying to pump her up to start school, and we're worried that having a 4-day weekend is going to take all that away. As of this afternoon, the BEA website still has the old calendar reflecting kindergartners start on Tuesday, September 7th. So my request to this very much respected board is to please, I'm begging you, please, work with the BEA in your meeting with them tomorrow and move the kindergarten family conferences to be held on Friday, September 3rd instead, and move the first day of kindergarten to be held on Tuesday, September 7th, or Wednesday, September 8th. Just don't have them start 1 day, 4-day weekend. So please just help our kids have a smoother transition and the kids have a better positive outlook for school. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Eric Cliven.
So that was my wife who just spoke in the case of physical distancing. Our child does have some of this. Some of the other children that we have been with in the area also have a hard time dealing with change, as you can imagine, in the past year. So trying to keep the consistency across the board, we have found as a parent group has yielded better results with our young ones. And that's really what we're hoping you can partner with teachers to make happen. Thank you for your time. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you. Next speaker, Delaney Mcmillan.
Hi, we are Interlake Saints Robotics, and recently we've won some pretty major awards, and we just thought we'd share with you. My name is Delaney. This is Melia, Tia, and our photographer Kowal. And although we did not go to traditional competitions, we did participate in 2 new challenges.
So one of the challenges we participated in, with the Innovation Challenge, we were tasked to identify a problem and design a solution to help people achieve optimum mental and physical health. Through research and creativity, our team came up with a unique solution to improve mental health by incentivizing physical exercise through a mobile game app.
The second challenge we competed in, the Game Design Challenge, was to design a robotics game that we normally compete in each year. And this year we finished among the top 90 out of 1,300 teams in the world. Our game, called Firefighting Frenzy, applied various principles of engineering and design to create a balanced and fun game for robotics teams to play and audiences to watch.
The next award, the Chairman's Award, is the most prestigious award a team can win and celebrates a team's dedication to improving the community by promoting the recognition of science and technology, especially among the younger population. We are among the top 2 teams from the Pacific Northwest to win the Chairman's Award this year. We're going on to compete against around 100 other teams from around the world for this award, and later this week we will find out the results.
The final award this year recognizes an individual team member's excellence in leadership and dedication to her team and community. Delaney Mcmillan has had the incredible opportunity to be named a Dean's List finalist and will also go on to compete with other finalists from around the globe.
You know, all of us at Saints Robotics have been empowered and inspired to pursue STEM to improve our community and our world. I'd also like to specifically thank Director Jeff Lowell for his incredible support of robotics, especially this year. Not only Interlake, but Sammamish, Titan, NRG, and Bellevue High School as well. All of his support, we're extremely grateful for that. And none of it also would have been possible without you. I know you hear often enough like how your decisions heavily impact numerous people in the district, and often for the negative, you hear a lot about that. But I also want to highlight the good that you've done. Your work has a positive impact on me and on countless other students and families, and robotics is just one way that that happens. So we're here to say something that we can't say enough and that you might not hear enough, and that's thank you, sincerely.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. And that was a combined, the two of them. All right. Thank you. So that was the last two commenters together. So that brings us to the end of our comments. I'd like to say our volunteer board of directors very much appreciates the time and effort put into public comments and correspondence to us. And for those who are not able to be heard in session today, submissions in writing are welcome. Director Chu.
I just want to make a quick comment and appreciation of the robotics team for your comments, but I also want to call out something that I noticed in your presentation and then in the Interlake ASB presentation last meeting. I want to call out that the gracious professionalism and the integrity, I don't know if it comes from the IB values, from the robotics, gracious professionalism, or what it comes from, but the fact that you note and call out other schools and appreciation for all those around you who support your work is really inspiring, because you yourselves are already doing great things, and I really appreciate and am inspired by your appreciation for those around you. So thank you for that, and thank you for coming out tonight.
Thank you. So that brings us to item 5, the annual plan progress report. I'm going to set it for just under 55 minutes with a 5-minute warning time, although it would be great if we could keep to that amount of time. Superintendent Collins, as I pass it over to you, perhaps with your update, you could, since we didn't cover it fully in the end of year and fall planning, you could comment on the school start dates. Okay.
Are you talking specifically about the kindergarten?
No, just generally.
Just in general, school start dates and how they're
including kindergartens.
okay, and how we arrive at the school start dates and that they are negotiated. So that was correct. The parents who spoke correctly identified that that process is through our negotiations with the Bellevue Education Association, and we received some feedback from parents asking if we could move the kindergarten start date, given that the first day of kindergarten landed right on a Jewish holiday, and in our efforts to be more inclusive and provide a sense of belonging for all of our students, we worked with the Bellevue Education Association to move the kindergarten start date. None of the alternatives were great, but the best that we could come up with was to start on that Friday. In order to avoid the Jewish holiday, we also made a pledge that we would be more thoughtful and inclusive in developing the calendar in the future through our bargaining process, and be more aware so that we don't run into situations like this in the future that inadvertently negatively impact some people. And we do understand the burden for some of our kindergarten, or for all of our kindergarten students, to have the 4-day holiday. And yet it was the best resolution we could come up with at the time.
Thank you. For this next section, I'll turn it over to you in terms of the structure. I believe there's a presentation and then for a period of time, and then we'll have a discussion on all topics.
Yes, thank you. And we do have a PowerPoint that we prepared in order to just pull from the reports some highlights. And so we would like to go through the PowerPoint if we could bring that up. As you can see, we have a number of reports that we're presenting tonight to give you some highlights. And these are summaries of work that has already been completed and giving you some idea of our progress that we made or did not make and what our reflections are on that and what are our steps moving forward. So if we can go to the next slide, please, that you can see that our purpose is to share these highlights and to support the board in meeting its objective of informed oversight by aligning on our lessons learned and the direction that we're heading. So be thinking of that as you listen to the presentation. Next slide, please. And so our agenda will include, we'll try to keep it brief, 20 to 25 minutes per topic, and then with about 5 minutes per topic, and then leaving 30 to 35 minutes for board conversation questions. Next slide, please.
Can I ask, are you following the PowerPoint or the other?
You should have the PowerPoint. It is a PowerPoint.
Okay.
Yes. It's the one titled Progress Monitoring Report. Progress Monitoring Report? Okay. Thank you.
All right, good evening, everybody. Heather Sanchez, Executive Director of Schools. Patty Sagworth and I will be providing some updates on peer connection. So you have the full report available for you for your review. We're just going to hit the highlights, and for each of the progress monitoring topics, we'll have no more than 5 minutes so that after we've gone through each of them, there's an opportunity for questions. So I'll be highlighting elementary, Patty will be highlighting secondary. So for elementary, the target was in our annual plan centered around peer connection to increase the percent of students reporting feeling connected to peers in elementary by 3 percentage points, and then in middle and high school by 5 percentage points. And then within that, we had a specific goal for our Black students reporting feeling connected to peers in elementary. We were looking for an increase of 3 percentage points, and again, 5 percentage points for our middle and high school. So in a nutshell, the progress is for elementary. We are on track and we met our goal for all students, increasing from 87% to 90% of students feeling connected to their peers. And then we exceeded our goal for our Black students, increasing from 83 to 89%.
And for second, while high school students who identify as Black did not meet the 5 percentage point increase goal, there was an increase of 3 percentage points for this subgroup when you compare spring 2020 to spring 2021. And the spring 2020 to spring 2021 percent decrease for all students at the high school level was 2 percentage points, moving from 53% to 51%. It's interesting to note, though, we also did a November progress monitoring, and when you compare November 2020 to spring 2021, all subgroups at the high school level experienced percentage point increases. So I thought that was fascinating. Middle level students did experience a significant decrease for all students as it relates to peer connection. They moved from 72 percentage points to 59 percentage points when comparing spring 2020 to spring 2021. And middle school students who identified as Black had a decrease of 9 percentage points. They went from 68 percentage points to 59%. It's important, however, to note that middle school does have overall a higher favorable response rate, despite the decreases that I just shared, as it relates to peer connections, with 59% for all students at the middle level, compared to 51% for all students at the high school level. And that trend data from going elementary, then middle to high, continued decreases over time is trend data that we see nationally as well. Next slide.
All right, so in terms of lessons learned, as we are coming out the other side of this pandemic and then looking towards next year, at the elementary level, the focus on Tier 1 school-wide strategies in combination with targeted individual or small group strategies, the combination of those two has yielded some positive results. I do want to mention here that this particular measure is peer connection, so it's fairly granular. However, when we think about the reality of a student's experience in the school, there's a lot of overlap with the overall social emotional well-being and what is occurring for that student. So our schools think about it through multiple layers of strategy, not isolating peer connection, but it's definitely related to it. So this combination of the two, the whole and then the targeted, has yielded some positive results for this year for elementary school.
And I'd like to point out, you can see a direct correlation. If you look at the third bullet, when you compare November 2020 to spring 2021, high school students with disabilities, they had the largest increase. They moved from 43% to 59%. And it should be noted that they had the greatest access to in-person services of students that were added in over time. So that made a tremendous difference for them to get in-person services. I'd also like to note in our focus groups, the high school students reported that the activities and the athletics that occurred in person and remotely for the activities early in the year made a big difference for them. And they cited that as one of the biggest reasons. And the focus groups for our middle school kiddos, they basically, not being there from the start of school to develop those relationships was really hard for them to then pick that up in a remote setting. And even when they came back to in-person services, they noted that the mitigating measures were somewhat restrictive for them. And they're usually like to run around, they're busy. It's kind of in between elementary and high school, and with the mitigating measures and the social distancing and the masks that continued to impede their ability to develop connections with their peers. Next slide, please.
Okay, so what's next? So what does this mean for us as we look towards next year? As we really focus on recovery and meeting the needs of our students, we all acknowledge that prioritizing the social and emotional well-being of our students is the top priority, including peer connection. And so for all of our schools, as we look to our opportunities for next year, we have made some budgetary priorities, which I believe Eva Collins has spoken with you about previously. In addition to that, all of our schools are fully committed to continuing to expand both school-wide efforts and targeted efforts for all of our students, and especially our students who have been most negatively impacted by the pandemic. At the elementary level, what this looks like in practice is a focus on really having with fidelity the implementation of our tier-wide socially emotional curriculum at our elementary schools. It was implemented this year, it has been implemented, but not with the degree of fidelity that we would necessarily like to see. That's going to be critical as we look to next year. And then providing some additional resources for some additional expanded small group and individualized support for students who need it. And then I think the last thing I would say is we would be absolutely remiss if we didn't capitalize and capture some of the really creative things that some of our schools did this year, really for the last 18 months, to support peer-to-peer connection. Some of the interest groups that cropped up, some of the way that assemblies have been repurposed and retooled, some of the connections across different groups and classes that normally wouldn't necessarily interact with one another, just some of the creativity. We want to keep that with us, that has been really focused on peer-to-peer connection as we move into next year.
And there's a lot of commonality with elementary, middle, and high. And the one piece that I would just like to highlight that really needs to be a heavy focus, early summer, going into the fall, have it up and running, are the in-person activities and athletics. They make a difference for our kids. That coupled with full in-person learning should get us off to a really strong start. Next slide, please.
Good evening, John Harrison, Chief of Staff, here to talk a little bit about where we're at with grading this year. And I'm going to start by reading the goal, just because I love the wording of this goal. All students are supported by a high-quality, equitable grading system that accurately reflects learning, is resistant to bias, and is motivating for students. So in the annual plan, there are 3 measures and targets. The first 2 are outcome measures, where the third one is more of an implementation measure. But the first one, and you'll recall that we put 3 grading practices into play this year as a result of the MOU with the August MOU with the BEA. And our target was that 85% of our secondary students would report that they are experiencing their teachers using these practices. The second target was a reduction in D's and F's in ELA and math for secondary students by at least 25%, and a similar and a 25% reduction as well in terms of our disparities. And then the third target was developing a shared understanding across stakeholder groups about what a new grading system looks like. That's reflective of stakeholder input and what it will look like and how it will be rolled out. And I'm going to start there by saying I think you're well aware that our original target for this for this measure was at the end of May. And given the kind of year that we had and the challenges with being in remote learning for most of the year, that very ambitious target, under the best of circumstances, we just weren't able to get there. So that work will continue. With respect to the first 2, we do have data to report on the implementation of the grading practices that we put into play. We recently did a survey of students, and 60% of secondary students surveyed are reporting that at least 4 of their teachers are using the 3 grading practices consistently. With respect to the D's and F's, I think you're well aware that grades are not due for the second semester until June the 23rd. That's tomorrow, so we don't have data for you at this point, but we will have data that we'll share in the annual plan summative report in August. And I shared 2 weeks ago in your update a summary of where the grading advisory team was at with this work. And in board docs tonight is a community update that's fairly detailed, that outlines exactly the work that was done this year, and more importantly, the work that will continue into next. Next slide. So lessons learned from the student survey data. One of the pieces was interesting and not surprising to me was that the rate of implementation at high school was significantly lower, 57% as compared to 65% at the middle level. Interestingly, 84% of students highly recommended that teachers implement the practices more widely. And the reason why I say that's interesting is I was hoping that it would be closer to 100%, but there's something to unpack there as well. And then the final thing I'll say is that even with implementation challenges and not a ton of lead time when we put these practices into place and inform teachers, we've got pretty solid buy-in, it appears, according to the students, that 60% of teachers are consistently employing the practices. So what's happening next for the grading advisory team is summer will be spent on developing professional learning for the 2021-22 school year. That broad stakeholder engagement will take place in earnest in the fall. We're going to start with a big picture of purpose of grading and philosophy of grading. Moving into the late fall, we anticipate developing recommendations for changes to grading practices, and we will solicit feedback on those draft recommendations. And then in the early winter, we anticipate finalizing those recommendations, developing a multi-year implementation plan. And the hope and the intent is that we would have final recommendations and an implementation plan by the end of January 2022. Thank you, and I'm going to walk my mic over to Director Jones, who I think is next. Oh, he's got one. Oh, he's in good shape.
Next slide. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Shamari Jones. Nice to be here in person with you today. I'm in the back. So this year we focused.
Shamari, I don't
I'm
think
not
people
sure if your
can hear
mic is
you
working.
because your mic.
Check. Yeah, it's on. This year we focused on a goal of our families, particularly those who have traditionally been marginalized, ensuring that they're more informed, better able to find supports, and are empowered to contribute to their student success. So we set some targets for the year as to how we wanted to ascertain that information through our survey, with a goal of seeking to achieve 70% of all of our racial subgroups feeling as though they were informed, and to maintain our last year's goal of 64 and 66% respectively for our families of all subgroups to maintain the feeling of support and empowerment. Next slide, please. So we gave our second survey this year, and it was incredibly fantastic, the effort that we put forward to ensure that we heard all of the voices of our families. We more than doubled the result of participants who received and resubmitted back to us the survey, and we received survey results from. So over 8,000 folks submitted versus 4,000 individuals last year. And what we found out this year, especially through serving more of our families and getting more information from them, is that there weren't more people who felt more informed, supported, and empowered. We actually decreased in some areas slightly significantly, maybe some connected to the fact that this is a really tough year for a lot of families, virtual and trying to come back into school, and other mitigating circumstances that may have happened in their personal lives to cause some of these feelings that we received from them through our survey. But we went respectively from 66 to 53% in those families feeling informed, 64 to 51% in families feeling supported, and 66 to 46% of families feeling empowered. Next slide, please. This particular graphic shows the charted information of last year's survey results versus this year's survey results. As you see the big bold block around the last portion of the left-hand side and around the entire portion of the right-hand side, it's a depiction of the overall from last year and the breakdown of what that overall from last year to this year looked like based on racial subgroups and other special programming. Next slide, please. And finally, lessons learned. Extenuating circumstances created this experience that I believe that we had this year and what we received as survey results. We do know that families desperately want to feel that level of connection, not just to their school building, but to their teachers and other staff within our organization. And we know very well that school buildings and staff would love greater support in finding strategies to connect to those families. We do know that families also want a single point of contact, and building trust and relationships. Those trust and relationships have had great positive impacts, and we've seen it through the individuals who serve our families directly, our teachers, our family connection center staff, and others within our organization who put forth that effort every day to engage and maintain those relationships. There's a desire, a very strong desire we saw in many of our comments of families wanting to know their individual students' progress, especially with their teachers within those buildings. And we have seen that successes that families have given us feedback on really relied heavily on our communications and dual communication strategies back and forth through talking points. They also commented that they had a really good experience with Microsoft Teams. What's next into the school year? We had a great session in our CERT admin meeting recently where school buildings had a chance to analyze the survey results as well as the anecdotes that families members took the time to submit to us. They're going to start in the next school year with not just taking from the information that they heard and learned through that survey, but implementing new strategies alongside with the family engagement team to address the things that were concerns for those buildings and find new pathways for families to feel informed, supported, and empowered, as we will continue to survey that on a continual basis. And schools will center the voices of students and their families in new, intentional, and exciting ways as our organization is adopting some strategies that will roll out here, starting with Leadership Institute, that will support our centering of those families and helping them to support their students in ways that ensure their student success.
Next slide, please.
Next slide.
That's okay. Hi, my name's Sharon Couts. I'm the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, and I am going to share with you our results for supporting educators with professional development and the other supports they need to effectively serve our students. The target was 80% of staff report they have the PD and support needed, and we did not meet this target. As you can see from the numbers on the slide, but we really did learn a lot about educator needs from the February interim survey that helped to inform our supports for spring and summer and into next year. Next slide. Thank you. One of the biggest learnings from those February results were, and also we did focus groups and just met individually by reaching out to different educators, is really this big need that educators have for just-in-time learning, especially this year with some embedded coaching supports that are ongoing. And I think a good example of this is from the spring sessions that were held for secondary educators. The sessions provided them with one-on-one time with ITCLs and also in small groups to learn about the hybrid environment and what that means when you're teaching in a hybrid environment just in time, just as it was about to happen. And then they provided ongoing coaching support as needed throughout the springtime. And in addition, we learned that educators really want more time together to collaborate around specific topics and to just learn from each other. And in response to this, we have held several grade level and course level sessions for educators where they were able to come together and learn with each other and from each other. And then lastly, the survey really provided us with some great information around the main topics that educators want to learn more about. And you can see the list of the topics on the screen. Next slide, please. And also in response to the mid-year interim survey, we formed a team of educators that spent a lot of time reviewing the data, and we put all of that feedback together and created the 3 pillars that you see on the slide around equitable and inclusive pedagogy, standards aligned instruction and assessment, and leveraging technology to support student learning. And so our focus this summer and into next year will be centered around student success, student growth, and family relationships, student and family relationships, all embedded within those 3 pillars. And I've also included a link to the Summer Institute catalog so you can see some of the offerings that will happen this summer. Next slide, please. And I think I'm turning it over to Jeff Thomas.
Thank you, Sharon. Jeff Thomas, Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources. I'm briefly going to go over the results of our staff engagement survey. This is the second year that we've done this survey. Last year, we did it around February of 2020. This year, we did the survey in March of 2021. The results are pretty straightforward. Our measure was to try and get to 80% of staff reporting high levels of engagement, which is where we were a year ago. We did not make that target. We are not on track. And in fact, the percentage of staff reporting high levels of engagement fell from 80% to 65%. We had predicted the fall. We just were not sure how much it would be. But I think it's reflective of just this incredibly challenging year and the impact that it had on our staff. Next slide, please. So the lessons learned, first, we did, in spite of the challenges, have some bright spots. One of the bright spots was that across the board, our employees reported that they felt that their work was valuable and made a difference, that it produced results. We had a slight drop, but the drop was within the margin of error. So we considered that to be very, very positive. We saw that depending upon the different groups, we had significant variability regarding the engagement indices. So for example, our classified employees by and large were the highest reporting groups of engagement. And we think that is attributed to an awful lot of work done by our staff leaders, by district through our labor management interaction, support from our school administrators. Our classified employees are the ones who, in many ways, had the most significant impact this last year, including furloughs and layoffs. And I think it's reflective of some of the creativity that we engaged in to try and minimize the impacts. The other lesson learned is there was a significant gap with our certificated staff, specifically with our school-based certificated staff. They were the group that was the lowest in terms of the engagement impact. And it really told us what kind of year they faced and the challenges. What's next? We need to come back and refocus on engaging our staff as members of the BSD community. And that means that we have to do some basics around supporting our staff, looking at how we communicate, and reuniting, realigning, and rebuilding relationships to focus on having a great year for school in the fall. Next slide, please.
So that concludes our 4 reports. And as you have your discussion, we gave you some guiding questions for your consideration. Obviously, you can carry on your discussion in any way that makes sense, but these questions seem to be working well in our previous reports, and so we thought we would put them up there again and ask you for any clarifying questions that you may have, anything that's resonating with you from what you heard, and any reservations that you might have about where we're going, recognizing we're going to be talking about our annual plan and where we're headed, but each of those reports included some next steps, and so there may be some things in there that you either are excited about or have some reservations about.
Great, thank you. So we have about 20 minutes left in this time period. So what I'll do is ask if there are any clarifying questions. We'll take them all and then try to address those and then move on to the resonating and reservations. So are there any clarifying questions?
Yes. I'm not sure if mine's clarifying. It might bring us into the next spot. So if I ask it and you don't find it clarifying, just table it and we'll just wait.
Well, it seems like you have the only clarifying question at this point. So go ahead, kick us off, and then you can even then go into the next.
Okay. So I just want to understand how our broader set of staff are contributing to the evaluation of these goals, like how our educators and other staff are looking at these and reacting to them, and what they're using. Are these goals guiding their work? Are they contributing to whether or not this is working? And what role are the folks who are working with kids and who are leading our buildings playing in evaluating and defining these goals?
So as you know, our goals are aligned to our strategic plan goals. And I'm really glad you asked this question, because I was actually writing down some notes as I was listening to these presentations. And what I wrote down is that the greatest likelihood of success for any of this work will come from our schools. And it'll come from our schools analyzing, and their leadership teams analyzing their the data for their school, which varies widely. So these are really broad results, because they're aggregated from all of our schools, but the actual school level results vary significantly. And so their response to the results will be different from our district level response and actually be more appropriate and meaningful at the school level. There will be some that will mirror the district results, but many of them don't. So they got results that look different than ours, and they increased in that area or didn't increase when we said overall we increased. And so that work at the school level with our building leadership teams that are developing their school improvement plans and narrowing down the strategies and getting specific to the context of their school based on their own results and based on the context of their school and their school communities and what makes sense for them is where most of the important work will happen. We set these broad goals together based on the strategic plan, and then our schools work to refine them and get more specific. And this is really going to be an important thing for us to talk about when we talk about the annual plan and how maybe it looks similar, but it may look subtly different, but it's really because of this whole idea that you just raised, Dr. Chu.
And I do have one other clarifying question. It's pretty straightforward. It is what Mr. Harrison was talking about. I just want to understand the math of the 60% of teachers are behind the standards-based grading. If the 60% represents 4 or more of 7 teachers for each kid, I'm not sure how that translates to 60% of all staff. So I just want to understand, was there different math done, or are you just doing a rough comparison there?
Yeah, 60% of the students surveyed reported that at least 4 of their teachers were implementing the practices consistently.
So that may or may not represent 60% of staff. We have no idea what actual number of teachers are doing that and how many of those kids had in common or not in common. And
yeah, correct. So any given kid would have, 6 or 7 teachers. So we didn't ask who their teachers are. So we do not have that data, but we will. So I think if you looked at the update, we also did a teacher survey. It closed yesterday at 5 p.m. So we haven't had time to analyze the data yet. But in that survey, we asked the teachers the extent to which they were using the practices. And furthermore, we asked them we asked them what were the reasons why they were using the practices. And if there were reasons why they weren't, what were they and in what circumstances? So that data so far is fascinating. So we're going to do an analysis and then we'll update the community report. And I will make sure that I get you that data analysis separately in your update.
Okay, got it. So it's just a rough number to give us some sense. Thank you.
All right, so then why don't we move on to the next question? So what's resonating with you from these reports? Does anyone want to start us off? I'll start us off. I really liked the igniting the in-person clubs, activities, and athletics. I think that's really important with our mission, vision, and values and the creators of our future world. So I like the phrasing and the ideas around that portion. And I'll just stray a little bit into our annual plan because I think that's missing from the annual plan portion. And so I do like seeing that it is here and a intention for the coming year.
Yeah, I would say that I think the acknowledgement that even when middle school and some high school students came back for in-person, they had a lot of challenges trying to get back to where they wanted to be. Just that period of time was too long. So I was interested in, but just not sure, meaning it resonates to me that there's an awareness. We know we have to do something about it. Like Dr. Wiest, I like the word ignite, but what I want to understand, and I don't know if this is going to be in the plan for the annual plan or discussion about that, how are we doing that? Like us, meaning I see a reference to for middle school in collaboration with Jubilee Reach, but I know that the ability of Jubilee Reach to necessarily hit all students is just, they're already taxed. So I guess a high level question I have is, if we end up finding ourselves in a place where, hopefully not this year, but at some future point, we have to pivot and students are not able to be in person for a while, how are we going to be able to not have this again? Meaning maybe some academics have to be taught virtually, but what will we do to take advantage of opportunities that we could have utilized to ensure students are engaged with each other and are getting, frankly, that connection that they need? So I guess I want to understand the what. What is the learning? What is the consideration for how we will do things differently should a scenario like this come up again at some point?
Okay, so we'll just kind of put that out there. Staff's taking notes, and then we're not doing a dialogue at this point, but maybe there'll be some summarizing comments. Director Chu.
Okay, I think I've got the mic. There are 3 points that resonated for me that I'll just call out. One is the athletics and activities and how critical and important it was. And I think I don't want to just throw it in the bucket of those are good things. I want to recognize that schools went out of their way, particularly middle schools, in developing more opportunities for students to build connections than I've ever seen them do and innovate in those spaces before. And even our elementary schools were doing some of that work. And I think it's something we want to think about what home it has more permanently in our district. The second thing that resonated for me is the increases in elementary school connectedness. I think we actually have figured some things out. And one thing I like about this report that I'll call out a little differently in the annual plan is a recognition and an understanding that social emotional learning does not equal social emotional supports. Like, there are supports and interventions that need to be in place. There's also learning and competencies and skills that we're building. And we need to be precise and careful about how we talk about those things so we understand what we're implementing and so that we communicate clearly to our community, our students, and our families what their expectations can be in those spaces. So that really resonated in that space. And then the third thing that resonated was the bright spot in the engagement. The bright spot in the engagement is that 3 of the communities that we have not served to the extent that we should and can and need to actually felt more empowered this year than ever before. And I think there was an awful lot of effort put in by staff to make that happen at multiple different levels. Shamari and his team did work, but there's also work done at the building levels and other district levels that made that happen. We don't want to lose that. That's actually super important work. And one of the things the board is trying to learn how to do is how to more successfully engage our community in our processes and help them participate. So I want to learn from what was effective about that and figure out how we can leverage that, but also do it in a way that is coordinated and doesn't overtax our community to always be on call for us. So to respect their time.
Yeah, I want to build on that. It's not directly in this report, but along with family engagement. So my understanding for graduation activities for seniors, there was a tremendous amount of outreach that went to all of the families to try to get 100% response on who was coming and attending. And so that seems a really robust family engagement effort. And so it's not included in this report. And yet I hope that the channels and the learnings and all of that, they're interrelated and applied. But I think that's one of the examples that it would be nice to see in our reports when we're doing something like that, where we're saying, like, we are implementing this full on, and that's an outreach that's a little bit different than the rest of the family engagement that you reported, but it just emphasizes the use of those channels. Director Mulley.
As far as things that resonated with me, I found the family engagement report interesting. You know, it's sort of a mixed bag, but I found it interesting that in a year when school was in people's homes, they felt less engaged, less informed than they ever had before. And I don't really have anything about, you know, a reason for that or anything, but it just struck me as surprising, and really says something about how stressful this year was for everybody. Everyone just trying to keep their head above water, like with no idea what's going on with anything. I mean, I know I felt that way the entire year. I still feel that way. So, you know, I really take Christine's point that on, you know, what can we learn from the bright spots? How can we like apply those lessons more broadly and sort of get back into feeling like we're working together? And I have, you know, this ties into some things that I'll talk about when we do the listening session debrief later as well. But that was just something that struck me as surprising.
I think just to build on that, I think for me, when I saw that, I take it as this is our opportunity to learn how to communicate better, because I do think that part of the challenge of the last year was just too much disparate information, but not well coordinated. So there is a point at which people just shut down, meaning as a parent, as well as a school board director, you get too much. It's an avalanche of information, but it doesn't mean that more is better. And so I think, you know, we have a great new executive communications director, and I think her task is a big one, but the opportunity is great to figure out, what do people need? How is it useful to get it to them? And when is it packaged in a way that they consume it and they engage with it? And when is it frankly overwhelming? And then how do you get them information when it is urgent? So I'm not surprised that there's a greater response to graduation, because that's frankly the tip of the spear is the parent or the student saying, I do not want to miss this. But everything else at some point becomes saturation. So I think that is our opportunity to figure out, how do people engage best? How can we package it up? What is an email that is just too long? How do we put the information that's important up at the top? And then what's the right, not just quantity of words, but right tone from whom? And how do we get that personalization that comes from a school? So I tend to think that those are recurring themes. So I'm not shocked, because I think we may be spewing out information, but we may not be doing it well.
Okay, so I think we've been talking about resonating a little bit, getting into reservations, but I want to make sure that we have time for that. I have an additional comment, but I want to go down. Dr. Malif, did you have more? Okay. Dr. Serafin, anything else? Dr. Chu.
Do you mean more on the other questions or more on the resonating?
Resonating and reservations.
Oh, I have reservations. Okay. I'm just gonna
wait. So I have one that's kind of both. So I'll do that, and then we'll wrap up there. So I think the theme that resonated with me was around engagement, and so I thought it was interesting to see that both there was an association broadly with in-person had higher engagement rates for both students and with staff. So I'm very glad we're moving in that direction. It's no secret that I had hoped that we were there sooner, and I hope that the repercussions of not getting there sooner won't be long lasting. So, and I hope that everyone is ready to re-engage in the fall fully, and the efforts that are described there are what really move us forward. So I noted that there were strong statements about engaging families in the work. It's called the family engagement effort, but there were specific statements in there around that. We also had that specifically for staff. And then even in the grading work, there was talk about really getting that community buy-in. And then overall, we have the superintendent's community advisory committee that is really living embodiment of that engagement. But then on the student side of that, there's less. It's a little bit more, what are we doing to students or for students? And there's understandable to some degree, but I would like to see more of a thought about how we are engaging students in that. So we want them to be connected to their peers. We want them to be connected to the school environment, find those connections, but more intentionality about really what that means to them, for them, and how. So we're making some assumptions about the clubs and athletics and activities, and we're seeing some associations with that, and that's important. But that's the piece that kind of in the next steps, perhaps more engaging students in what it means for their well-being. And so that brings me back to my earlier comment about kind of creators of their future world. What does it mean for them to be engaged, and are we providing the pathways that best support that? Okay, Director Chu. Oh, did you have something related to that? Did you want to jump in, Director Serpa?
Yes, I think it is, so I'll take a crack at it. I think on student engagement, and this is maybe somewhere between the grading question and others, I guess we hear, so we understand from students, and I know you had a percentage of, how many of their teachers were actually utilizing, multi-pronged assessments. I guess what I'm not seeing, and I'm not clear where this fits, so this is more of a just general question, just the opportunity for students to say, do I feel that those grades represented how much I learned, and more broadly, like how I learned this, particularly this past year? I think that wasn't super clear to me.
Okay, thanks. So we'll move on. Okay, Director Chu, thanks for waiting. Here.
It takes a while to get to green, so I can get impatient and then I push something else and then it doesn't go there, and it's fine. I got Dr. Weiss's mic. We're happy. Thank you. So the question that's brought up for me is one that I'm going to ask in multiple forms over and over again. I already asked it once. I'm going to just put it in another form, and that is, we're looking at these goals. And we're reflecting on them, and we're doing a great job being reflective and thoughtful and but what I'm really wondering is, are we able to use these goals to drive the work real time? Because when we're not achieving what we know, we knew that we were going to have some troubles, but we did set these goals. We finalized them when we had been out of school for several months. It wasn't a surprise to us that we would be out of school for several months, so we knew that. So the question is, are these the right goals? And do we have the ownership that we need in these goals from our staff to be able to use them so that they are actually driving effective change and practices and supports that we need? And I'm not sure I know the answer, because they seem like good measures. They're relevant and they matter to us. And I think most people would agree to that. But are they the right ones to drive the work of our district? And I'm wondering how to empower our stakeholders, our staff, our students, our families, to help us to inform the goal setting process. You can't ask thousands of people to co-author goals, but you can ask thousands of people to inform the process in a meaningful way that we can then process. So I would like to understand how we're going to make sure that we have the right goals to drive things, that we have the buy-in from our stakeholders to utilize them, and that we as a board don't just get the understanding of the reflection, but we get some insight into seeing the goals do the work that they're supposed to help us do and help drive and support for us in the process. So that's kind of it's a question and it's a reservation about where we're at, but yeah, and I do think we have very thoughtful look at things. So it's not a diss, it's just a question about how do we be more effective and how do we be more collaborative and live our values in ways that really bring all our stakeholders to the table.
Oh. Okay, thanks. So our flashing warning, I wasn't sure it was going to work because it wasn't like an egg timer. It wasn't counting down, but it's telling us we have just a couple minutes left in this section. Are there any other comments? Because then I would like to turn it over to Superintendent Collins, maybe to have a few minutes to reflect on the discussion and what she heard. Is there anything else? You have one more? Go ahead.
This will be really quick. I do want to just say that one question that this report doesn't quite answer for me is the progress we made with respect to our commitments to equity and to advancing those. And I think our equity commitments will have another report in August, so maybe that's to come. But I think that the hope was that this year and beyond that we would start trying to couple that work with the annual plan so that the district and the all the people doing this work aren't doing 1,000 reports. So just a thought that it struck me as we don't have the answers to that embedded here. And so I wonder how we might see that come together. That's all.
Okay, anything else? Okay, so Superintendent Collins.
Okay, thank you for that. That was a great discussion. I really appreciated that. And I think if I were to give it my nutshell summary of what some of the takeaways are, one thing I heard, I think, from everyone was this idea of capturing and capitalizing on some of the things that we learned this year and and how that can inform us moving forward. Like, don't let go of some of the things that worked well. For example, the athletics and activities, that where we did get great success, what were those things and how can we capture them as we come back to our new normal, you know, not the old normal, but a new normal. The other thing I heard was something about communication. I didn't hear that from everyone, but I think it was a point well taken, because communication is an area that we all identified this year as being not to the level that we would have liked, and communication is tricky. I think what you were talking about, Seema, and that we fire hose people sometimes with communication, and sometimes we need to say it multiple times before it's heard or understood. But on the other hand, too much communication is not effective at all. It doesn't produce anything for us. So finding multiple ways to communicate and so multiple entry points for people. People like to hear differently. I, you know, as a principal, remember that I surveyed families, and I got responses all the way from "we don't hear from you enough" to "stop killing trees," because this was before email. So you know, it just varies on what's important, but finding ways that we can communicate small bites to people and places for them to go to get more information, I think. And then how are we engaging stakeholders in the development of our goals and the process? I heard Dr. Chu raise that multiple times. I think it's a very valid and important point. And my response is still that I think going back to the school level is where we need to have some broad goals. How do we get stakeholder engagement in those broad goals? And then where those goals get refined and the strategies get developed at the school level, I think is kind of where the rubber hits the road and where we can expect to get results. Because there have been many times when we have had plans, could be a strategic plan, could be an annual plan, that never get, I call it socialized, but essentially understood, or even any buy-in at the school level, any knowledge of, and then there will be no results. Because if it's not embodied at school level, it's not going to happen. So those are very valid questions, and I think we need to continue to wrestle with that. We do have a number of ways that we involve stakeholders, and I don't know that it's enough yet. I think we have all of the pieces in place now, though, with our building leadership teams and the work that we're going to be doing this year at the Leadership Institute and the ongoing work we're doing with those leadership teams. I do think we have the avenues to do that. So I think pieces are in place for that. And then finally, one important point that I picked up on was engaging our students. And I was really struck by the students who came tonight to speak about their successes and accomplishments. These are creators of a future world. This is our vision. These students are the creators of their future world. And even the fact that they took the initiative to come here tonight and speak and share and to thank and show gratitude is just exactly what we would want for all of our graduates. And engaging our students, they have a lot to say, they have a lot of knowledge, and their buy-in, I would say, is probably even the most important.
Great, thank you. So that brings us to the end of item 5. And so we'll move on to item 6 and 7. So what we'll do is we're going to go into executive session and then our break. So I'll read the purpose of the executive session, and then what we'll do is we'll have that and the break. And then when we come back at the end of the break, I'll report how long the executive session went for, but we'll be, for everyone else, essentially on break until 6 o'clock. So the purpose of this executive session is to evaluate the qualifications of an applicant for public employment or to review the performance of staff member. However, discussions of salaries, wages, and other conditions of employment to be generally applied within the district will occur in a meeting open to the public. And when the board elects to take the final action of hiring, setting the salary of an individual staff member or class of staff members, or discharging or disciplining an employee, that action will be taken in a meeting open to the public. So with that, we are in executive session and then break/recess until 6 o'clock.
Hello?
Hi, Carolyn. This is Naomi. The board is an executive session.
Yes, I was wondering if Mike Bartz is there. I don't know how to get in.
You know what I'll do is I'll ping Eva and ask her to call you in.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Give me a
Yeah,
second.
I don't have any calendar thing for this or anything, so.
Yeah, I don't think there is one because I think they were there in person. So let me see what I can set up. I'll see if I can get a hold of someone to set it up for you. No problem. Just give me a minute. They were supposed to be back at 6, so.
Yeah.
Carolyn,
Yeah.
I'm going to call you on your phone.
So
for everyone else, we're about to come back.
I don't have my phone.
Okay, we'll figure something out. So we wanted to update Director Watson, and then we'll be returning into session. So we will send Director Watson an email link right now, and then update her, and then we'll be able to come back. All right. We have returned. The executive session ended, I think it's 6 p.m. and then we attempted to provide an update and then took the break. And so now we are back and moving on to item 8, which is the consent agenda. I move that we approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, the consent agenda passes. Were there any other comments on that? Oh, yes, and Director Watson has joined us. Director Watson, were you able to vote on the consent agenda? Just making sure that our technology here is working. Director Watson, are you able to unmute?
She's still in the call.
Oh. So we are attempting to reconnect with Director Watson. We'll just give that one moment. I will, in the meantime, though, go on and read item number 9. It's a reduction in force. The district continues to work with the Service Employees International Union Local 925 to mitigate the impact on employees of the impact of the pandemic. Steps have been taken, including reassigning employees to different work, use of varied leave provisions, transfer of employees, furloughs, and modified work assignments. The SEIU 925 has been a valuable partner through this difficult time, and the impacted employees have not worked this entire school year, so the district maintained health benefits for these employees until April 30th, 2021. Employees will have recall rights for 1 year. We anticipate that impacted employees will have the opportunity to be rehired the next school year upon positions being available. This reduction in force encompasses 8 employees that received a reduction and are listed in the PDF. So I move that the board adopts this reduction in force. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, all those voting yay?
Aye.
Aye. Yay, aye. Here.
It's not the battery, it's a connectivity problem. Okay, aye.
Director Watson, are you connected?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I'm going to abstain since I haven't heard all of the preamble.
Okay. With that, the reduction in force is adopted. Again, this is not the type of action the board or district wants to take. We understand that many steps were taken, that there has been a strong working relationship, and that employees do have the recall rights for 1 year. And I'll say I personally hope that we are able to welcome our employees back to the district if they're so willing and we have positions to be able to do that. Director Watson, I just wanted to go back since you, I think, were here. Did you want to vote on the consent agenda?
No.
Would you like to, for the consent, not this item, but item 8, the consent agenda, would you like to register a vote for that?
No, I'm sorry. I'm just coming in and I'm just getting up to speed.
Okay. Item 10, annual plan draft. So we are Mr. Harrison, can you move so I can see the clock, the item, we moved those billboards. Can we move them so I can see the clock, please? Thank you. So annual plan draft, we had allocated 55 minutes for this. We're going to try to do it in 45 minutes, and then if we need additional time, we can extend it. So Superintendent Collins.
Mike, if you can pull up the annual plan draft. It was a Word document or perhaps a PDF, but not a PowerPoint. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is our first view of the annual plan. It is very drafty, as you likely noticed when you looked at it, that there were some data missing and some things that we have not yet completed. It is your opportunity to consider these goals and the measures that we are considering our highest priority as we move into the 2021-22 school year. And just as a reminder, in terms of our process of goal development, that we do have a 5-year strategic plan. We will be moving into the 4th year of that strategic plan, and we still use that plan as the basis for our annual planning and measuring what progress we're making to those larger goals that were developed through a collaborative process back in 2018. But in addition to that, this year, the Superintendent Community Advisory Committee was formed, and that committee, our council, looked at data and information shared throughout the year, and strategic direction was discussed with that council for the recovery and how we might reimagine education moving forward. And as a result, some strategic investments and priorities were identified, and we shared those with you earlier, and that helped form the basis of our recovery plan. So considering our strategic plan and our recovery investments that we shared with you last month, we developed the annual plan. And the annual plan really is intended to address 4 core areas that are the core areas in our strategic plan. And those are, if you will scroll a little bit, please, so we can see that chart. Those are student well-being, academic success, exceptional staff, and family and community engagement. So I'm glad that we had the opportunity to share with you our progress monitoring report earlier, because that gives you sort of a snapshot of where do we sit currently in some of these areas, and the next steps that you heard, and some of the things that you were thinking about. So keep those in mind as we go through this annual plan, so you can let us know where you see that fitting and where you still see maybe there are some holes or it's not resonating. Within these areas, the first 2, student well-being and academic success, those are our student outcome goals and measures. And so we have those 6 specific areas that we'll be prioritizing. And when you think of these areas, think of what are we doing for all students, and then what are some additional steps that we'll be taking for some students based on need. So in the student well-being, for example, sense of belonging, that is a goal that we had prior to the pandemic been focused on, and we had been making some headway on that area. We think it's critically important that we continue to focus on sense of belonging, and that's for all students, so that we have the climate and culture in our buildings that really supports our students and feeling this sense of inclusion and belonging. Social emotional learning, that is also a tier 1 universal approach to developing students' social emotional health. And then finally, mental health, and some of the things that we talked about before that we want to continue to work on are how we identify through our universal screening students who need additional supports and coping skills. And we saw some success with that this year and would like to continue that work. And so those are the 3 main areas for student well-being: academic success, academic growth is an area that makes sense to us. We struggle on how to measure it, but we think it's critically important. We know that students are going to be coming in with all kinds of different experiences over this past year that's really different from what we've experienced in previous years. And so we want to take them from where they are. We want to measure them in the fall, measure students' academic proficiency in the fall, and grow from there. So wherever the kids land when we get them in the fall, we would like to grow from there. And then for students that we all identify as requiring additional supports, we would like to see their growth accelerated in order for students to meet or exceed proficiency. And then finally, graduation success. How are we preparing our students to be college and career ready? And are they on track for graduation success and meeting that graduation timeline? And so this is not just for our seniors, but for all students in high school. The other two, exceptional staff and family and community engagement, these really support our student outcomes. And what are some of our high priorities? These are still aligned with our previous goal areas. So our diversity of educators and staff engagement, which includes their having the resources that they need and training that they need and supports in order to fully engage in effective instruction and high quality instruction. And then finally, you heard a lot about the family engagement, and that will continue to be a high priority for us. We have a lot of work to do in that area. You saw those results and that our families are not feeling as informed, supported, and empowered as we would like. So that gives you the sort of the big picture of where are we headed, where are we currently, and where are we headed in this annual plan. So now we'll go into a little bit more depth as we present to you some of our targets and measures. Scroll, please. Continue to scroll. Where would you like it?
Heather Edlin, Executive Director of Teaching and Learning. I'm going to talk a little bit about our social, emotional, and student well-being priority. So as Eva shared, we are looking really closely at trying to nest the goals that we have in this area to cover a variety of experiences that students will have in our schools. As you heard in the progress report for the end of the year, we did see things that we did school-wide that were advantageous for students, as well as doing some things that were instructional in nature, and then kind of that prescriptive support that students might need if they're experiencing some difficulties. So I'm going to kind of talk about each of these pieces. So the first one is the students feeling a sense of belonging. That is the one that we've been doing for a number of years using the Panorama student survey. And it really does measure the kinds of things that schools do in a school-wide setting. So what are some of our school-wide cultural norms, practices that we have, et cetera, when students respond to that, as well as their relationships with their peers and with their educators. And we always triangulate that information with other school-based data sources, looking at kind of the attendance and behavior data, as well as walkthroughs that we do at the school and questions and focus groups. So this is a really good indicator for us about how that's going, and we can look at it year over year, as well as some of the qualitative data pieces that we do by walking through our schools, as well as looking at some of the other indicators to help us support our schools and ensure that the school-wide culture is supportive of students' well-being and learning. If you want to scroll kind of to the next section, the next session is about the social emotional learning. Oh, you can keep going. That's the sense of belonging data. So this school year, for the first time, we implemented another section of Panorama, which was about the individual students reporting on the 5 CASEL competencies. The 5 CASEL competencies are the 5 areas of personal, social, emotional learning that we want students, the standards that we want students to learn while they're in our school system. And so students this year did report on their own social emotional learning in both the fall and spring, and we will again do that next year. You can see that we're reporting data on all of the areas of the CASEL competencies. However, our biggest focus is going to be on looking at our students in their personal awareness, And the reason that we're selecting that is, one, it has a lot to do with our racial equity piece. So it's about their own social identity and how that fits. It also is about a collectivist culture. So how am I in relationships to others? And we do know that that'll be really important as we're coming back. So we'll be looking at that growth over the year to identify, we'll look at all areas, just as we looked at other measures in the school culture piece too, but we'll also be looking at that particular measure and looking at individual students. And this measure, coupled with the DESA-Mini, coupled with the BIMAS, et cetera, the other screeners that we do, will help us then get to that next level of support that you'll see in this plan. So if we scroll a little bit lower there, you'll see then the intervention supports, or those prescriptive supports that we'll provide to students who are coming up as needing additional support. So those would be the things that we do with coping skills. Coping skills being anything we do to help students address a particular area of need, be that depression, anxiety, school readiness skills, school anxiety, as well as it might be a response to something episodic, a grief support group, a divorce support group, etc. So we will continue to report on those and be using those, and then using our screeners and BIMAS measures to progress monitor that as well. So that's what you see captured here in the student well-being as a nested layer of mitigating measures from school-wide to individual supports. And I think I'm turning it over to academics to Kelly.
Okay. Page 4, academic success. Kelly Aramaki, I'm one of the executive directors of schools. I'm just going to give you a little bit of context and then dive into the main parts of our academic success portion of the annual plan proposal. The first thing I'll just mention is you'll notice that it's very streamlined. It is not comprehensive. Academic success is the work of our school district, and it's ultimately what we're trying to equip our kids with in order to be successful in college and their careers. But for this goal, we have really streamlined it with things that are measurable so that it can guide the work of our school district. But to give you context for how we developed this and why we're advocating for this level of clarity, the first one is, as we come out of the pandemic, it is a priority for us to understand where kids are academically this fall. We need to know where kids are at, and then we want to be able to measure their growth from that point. So that part is really critical. Philosophically also, we acknowledge that students may have had some disruption to traditional learning, but we want to build our plan on the fact that our students this past year and a half, they may have lost some traditional learning, but the things that they have learned are really substantial and greater than any other generation of kids. And so we're trying to build our academic plans on the fact that our kids have had a different kind of learning this year, but we do believe that the learning that they had is something that's going to equip them as creators of their future world. The third thing I wanted to mention was related to that is the purpose of assessing students and measuring their progress is not to identify and admire this problem of learning loss, but rather to determine where the kids are learning are to date, and then to align how we teach them as according to the grade level standards. We've engaged in multiple conversations with folks, with different stakeholders about the cost benefit analysis of assessments and the amount of time that we use on assessments in class, and it is a delicate balance. We don't want to over-assess students because we know that the instructional time is precious. And we don't want to give so many assessments that teachers don't have time to analyze the assessments to guide their instruction. We also don't want to under-assess students because we need the information so that we know what to teach the students. And then the last thing I wanted to just point out was what you said, Dr. Chu, really resonates around stakeholder engagement in goal setting. The last thing I wanted to say about kind of the framing of this is we wanted to create enough space so that we can engage our stakeholders in goal setting, but also in prioritizing what needs to happen for kids and families coming out of this pandemic. And so by having streamlined goals like this, it gives us a little bit of space to add and adjust as necessary based on family and student voice and feedback. And so Shamari talked about this, and Eva talked about this as well, but we are planning to engage our principals in how to really listen to our families and students as a way of developing equitable plans to support families and students coming out of the pandemic. With that foundation, there are three main goals for our academic success portion of this annual plan. The first one is we want all of our students in every subgroup to experience typical or high growth. And so looking at the tools that we have at our disposal and looking at the school board, your goal of measuring a year's growth. So lots of conversation about measuring a year's growth, at least a year's growth for students. We believe that the STAR assessment that we have is the best tool that can approximate a year's growth for students. It's not perfect, but the STAR tool is it's predictive of the success on the Smarter Balance assessment, and it has a built-in growth measure capability. And so it's a tool that we have that can measure growth. It doesn't refer to it as year's growth, but it refers to it as typical growth or high growth. And so for our students that are at grade level, we're looking for typical growth. For students that are below standard, we're looking for high growth. And so we've set a goal of improving the students who are showing typical or high growth, especially coming out of the pandemic next year. What's important about this goal for us is that it acknowledges the fact that kids are going to come in all different places this fall. That's true every year, but it's especially true this coming year. And we want to be able to show growth based on wherever the students enter. The last thing I'll say about this part of the goal is STAR is not the be-all end-all of assessment tools. And so we don't want you to think that just because this is the tool that we're using for a lot of our goals. The real work that happens is happening in the classrooms with classroom-based assessments. And so that a lot of the focus of our work to show growth on the STAR assessment is by using the classroom-based assessments to show that the kids are making typical or high growth. The second component of the academic success component of the annual plan is all students, we want all students to be proficient in literacy and math. And so we acknowledge that every subject area is important that we teach kids, and different content areas inspire different students. But for this plan, specifically focusing on recovery coming out of the pandemic, we're focusing on literacy and math because they are key to the success of our students in every other subject area. We're using the STAR assessment as well for this goal. Yeah, we're using the STAR assessment for this as well. It's easy to use. It takes relatively little time. And as I said before, it's predictive of success on the Smarter Balance assessment. But similar to what I said about the other goal, the key work doesn't come at the level of the STAR assessment. The key work comes at what we're doing in the classroom. So in order for us to measure and work towards all of our students being proficient in literacy and math, our real work is around using high quality instruction and assessments in the classroom. And so an example of this is we're adopting for this coming year a new math curriculum, K-7. We're very excited about it. The adoption team was very excited about the level of rigor, the pedagogy that goes with it, and the assessments aligned to standards. And so our effort towards this goal, it's just measured for you with STAR because that's a tool that can aggregate, but we're going to be doing a lot of the actual work using the common assessments in that curriculum. And then the last component of this, and I'm sorry it's taking so long, the last component of this is graduation success. So one of our key deliverables to our families is to ensure that our students graduate from high school and they are ready for college and for their careers, and that they have the tools to be creators of their future world. And so this particular part about graduation success is really about identifying students that are at risk of not graduating. So we this goal is about setting up teams at every school. It's about having a district team and looking at data to identify students that are at risk of not graduating, and then providing each and every one of them the targeted personalized support that they need to be able to graduate on time. So it's, like I said at the beginning, it's not comprehensive with all the work that we're doing with academics. We're hoping that it's adequate to show accountability and growth as a system, and together the three of them cover elementary through high school. And I don't know who I'm passing it off to.
I'm next. Thank you, Kelly. Jeff Thomas, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources. If we could go to the next slide, please. Or the next several slides. These are the data slides. There we go, exceptional staff. Thank you. We have remained in a very consistent, focused area around two top objectives in our work regarding exceptional staff. And it's really about making sure that the staff that we hire and retain are really there to improve the student well-being and academic performance. And so much of our work is about culture. And I think one of the things that's important is just to remind ourselves a definition that we're using for culture, which is engagement, which represents the levels of enthusiasm and connection with employees that they have with their organization. And it really ties into how motivated employees are to do work on behalf of the organization and how committed they are to staying here. Some of this is a carryover to what we did a little bit earlier today, but the last 18 months have just been quite a challenge. And now that we're moving to the recovery phase post-pandemic, we have an opportunity to take what we've learned and in my mind, recommit to really getting after staff engagement and continuing to support the diversification of our certificated staff working directly with kids. These are the same priority objectives that we've had previously. The difference being that our staff engagement from 2020 to 2021 dropped by roughly 20 percentage points. And we need to focus on recommitting and re-engaging to get that data back to where it was when it was 80% previously. We continue to diversify our staff. What we do not know yet is what the outcome is of diversification during this last year of recruiting via 100% virtual recruiting. So when we get our next metrics in the fall, we'll have a sense of how we have done. So if we could scroll to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the key for us, what's up next, is to, again, improve our staff engagement by 10%, but also to continue to diversify our certificated staff that I identify as non-white by 2%. And we'll have our first opportunity to progress monitor in November when we get a chance to review our demographic data from hiring. And then when we conduct our staff engagement survey in the winter of 2022, we'll see how we're doing. But it's really about focusing on re-engaging, building our community back from this last year. And
Shamari.
I believe it goes to Shamari next.
Shamari Jones, you're on. Okay, well, I'll just do the family engagement part.
Says he can't unmute, just to be clear.
Oh. Shamari, are you struggling to unmute?
Looks like he's going to disconnect and reconnect.
Okay. Well, while he's doing that, I did want to point out that in the, you may have noticed that in the annual plan measures that typically we would say we will increase by, some percentage, 2 percentage points or 5 percentage points. And this year we took that out from most of the measures and instead just said that we would increase the percentage, but we didn't put an exact amount. And that came, I did some digging and looked around at other plans, across the country and tried to find out how they were developing their annual percentages, and noticed that many of them didn't put in an exact number. And I think it goes to the point that Dr. Chu was making earlier about to what extent do our staff at the closest level of implementation have input into these goals. And our school improvement plans will have measurable targets. I mean, these are measurable as well, but we don't have a specific percentage or discrete number for the annual plan measures. We do for the strategic plan and the overall 5% and what we're aiming toward. But we considered that, and this is something we'll want your feedback on, that increasing is our goal, and that it isn't really about, did we make that 3% or no, we missed it because we only got 2.5. I heard some of the reports that we were describing tonight, and we made increases, but they weren't to the level, they weren't to the 5% and that will vary year by year. Overall, our goal is to reach a certain percentage by the end of 5 years. The other thing is that this is going to be such a different year for us, where the starting point will be different. And we just wondered if increasing from whatever the baseline is at the beginning of the year makes more sense. So it's something that we want you to wrestle with as well. We're not certain about that, if that's the best idea, but it is something that we wanted to consider, and we'd like your input on that.
Okay, something's going on, and now I hear echo, but something's going on with my audio and my video for whatever reason, so I apologize. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Hello? Okay. So for family and community engagement, again, we're starting with ensuring that our families, and particularly those who've been traditionally marginalized, are feeling that sense of being informed, supported, and empowered. We've teased out what those 3 terms mean to us as an organization by way of the information we've ascertained from our families. So it's informed meaning to the extent in which families feel informed by the student's academic progress and social emotional well-being. And particularly, as we heard through a lot of the feedback that family gave directly in their anecdotal answers to many of our questions, they want to know specifically their students' progress and the level in which they, the family member, can support the progress of their student. Support is to the extent in which families know how to access the support. And so we have, and say we have, numerous supports in our systems to ensure that families can gain all the access that they need in order to best provide what is needed to their particular student. And then lastly, empower is to which extent the families feel like partners in the decision-making process. And so a lot of that is how we engage with them in the school system, how we access their voice when seeking to engage with their student, etc. Families really want to be involved in order to be empowered. I cannot see all of the screen that you see. It seems really blurry. Is anyone else having that problem? Okay, so families feel, you are too, Carolyn?
Yeah, I get half a screen, then I get the full screen, then I get half a screen.
And then I get a big blur. So I apologize, but there's a lot that I'm not being able to see. But as a priority, we will continue to measure how families feel informed, supported, and empowered through our annual survey that we will roll out, with the intent to consistently increase the number of participants that will engage in the survey and return the survey to us with how they feel in relevance to those 3 topics and subject matters. We will be rolling out opportunities this year for schools to more greatly get involved in this process, as we know the schools and teachers, and particularly our direct service providers, have the greatest amount of connection to our family members, and also working more greatly with our community partners, and others that surround our system in our district, to make them aware of and bring them into the fold of supporting our families on a much greater level, so that it is not a unilateral approach, but it's a collective communal approach to this effort. Can we scroll a little bit? Thank you very much. So we talked about the measurements from earlier and how we decreased greatly. And we'll be working with our school board and executive team this year to set measurements for the upcoming school year 21 and 22. As Eva Collins said a little bit earlier, we have a lot of work to do for our families to truly feel any one of these 3 things. 53%, which is the highest measurement this year of how we measured our families and their sense of engagement. 53% is not good enough for where we would like to be with regard to our families feeling that level of informed. And so we will continue to work collaboratively with our communications department, as they've hired a new staff member, and we'll be hiring additional staff members to lead that effort. We will be working with a district family engagement team that consists of leaders across the organization in support of how we infuse deliberate family engagement strategies into each individual department as well as each individual school. And we'll be measuring our successes along the way through either surveys, anecdotes, or consultation with staff members on the family engagement team to help support the efforts of that particular building moving forward. We will continue with our focus groups. We did many this year that were enlightening and engaging and helped us to move forward in how we practice serving our families. We are definitely promoting that all of our staff members understand the responsibility is every one of ours to engage with our families. And so we're promoting check-ins, we're promoting parent coffees, we're promoting all types of instances where our students and families can receive information in the way that they would like to receive it in order to feel informed. And we will continue to report through progress monitoring a couple times a year in our summer report that we will have at the end of the year.
Okay, thank you, team. So as you can see this year, the annual plan, it does not, it's fairly consistent with our strategic plan and aligned with that. However, what changes year to year are our strategies. Those continue to evolve. And if you recall, our recovery plan that we shared with you included a number of key priority investments in mental health and academic interventions and supports, and as well as supports for our families. So keeping that in mind, we would love to hear from you of anything that did resonate with you that you hope that we will keep in the plan, anything that you find as either a showstopper or something that you would like us to really consider and changing, and then any other direction that you'd like to provide.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm just going to go down the line and we'll just do kind of all 3 from each director. And then if that happens to go quickly, then we can try to have a little bit more of a discussion. And then directors, if we feel that there has not been adequate time for input, we can look to putting some time in the next meeting. All right, Director Malif, would you be ready to kick us off?
Sure. So can you remind me the 3 questions you want? I'm sort of writing notes and missed it.
Something you really liked about the plan that you want to make sure we hang on to, anything that you think, whoa, this is a showstopper, this probably shouldn't be in our plan or doesn't seem like a priority, and any other direction?
There was nothing for the second category. I think these are all goals that are aligned with, I'm getting some feedback, which is kind of odd, aligned with our strategic plan. I liked the focus on rebuilding. Some of the things that, struck me, it's hard for me to kind of articulate exactly what I mean by this, but, as far as like how we're going to achieve these goals, we're relying a lot on assessments. And one of the things that we discussed a lot in previous meetings is that the standard assessments, like, screening assessments or standardized tests or whatever, are not going to really catch it. And it's really our staff and our teachers and our educators that are our best resource for finding out where kids are coming in the fall. And what I'd like to see reflected in the annual plan that doesn't show up much in this first draft is what the supports for that is going to look like. Because I think it's going to be a heavy lift for teachers in the next year. And so what does the in-building and the MTSS supports look like for that kind of lift? That's what I've got right now.
So I think I'd like to double down on maybe two areas. Much of them came up when Dr. Arimaki was talking about not just looking at what students have lost, but also what they've gained, and the importance of ensuring that we test, but we don't, frankly, over-test. So let me start with, I think I'd like to understand better how we are learning, maybe from students themselves as well as educators. What do they think they lost? I know that a lot of them, based on feedback we've had, would point to social losses. I'd like to know, what do they think they lost academically, as well as what do they think they gained? I kind of hear in what you're saying, I think something that we know is particularly true for middle and high school students is this last year also was one of a real level of social awareness and a level of realization of how much impact they can have in terms of activism. So I'd like to understand, how are we actually hearing that from students, or are we seeking to understand what they thought they lost and gained, and what they think we can do to either help them bridge a gap or help them kind of, hate to use cliches, but lean into things that they feel like, hey, I discovered this last year and I want to do more of it. So that's a question I have. You could repeat the exact same under educators. I bet they have observations. We heard from many elementary teachers who said, I learned this last year how much by using Teams, for example, I could connect one-to-one with a student in ways that I hadn't before. So I'd like to know from them too, what do they think they gained as an educator, but also what do they think the students they taught may have lost or gained? So that's, I guess, a bucket of questions that might frame and build on something you had. But then back to goal setting, and this might be more for you, Eva, on the conversation, or Deputy Superintendent Collins, sorry. On the topic of goal setting, I think Dr. Chu referenced this too. I'd like to understand better how we are engaging stakeholders, like the how, because I think we talked about this in our goal committee too. Often the principals and teachers assume it's the board that creates these goals. We review them, we approve them, but they actually come from you guys, and it's helpful for us to know, have you struck the right balance in getting that input? And if so, then it goes back to the how do you create those goals, and what level of engagement will you have reflecting and learning from the past? Like in the past, we've had goals that didn't feel right or felt impossible to try to meet by many of our teachers or principals. So what did we learn from that and what are we doing differently? So that's really more questions. I don't have anything under the bucket of, rejection of ideas or thinking that you're on the wrong path.
Okay, Director Chu.
All right. I'll start with what resonated for me. I like the focus. I like the level of focus. I think we have had too many foci in the past, and I think that it's good to take the 5 core goals and get really focused. This year, what are we going to do to advance these goals? Sometimes you can't increment across every aspect of every goal every year. You pick pieces and they help you jump. And I think sometimes the incrementalism keeps us from making the big leaps. And in some ways, I am disappointed to see the 3rd goal disappear, because I think that is one of the places of inspiration that I believe might help us make the next big leap. But this is a recovery year, so this is good to be focused and where we really can do great things. So here are the things I'd like to understand better, and then things that I maybe would like to see fleshed out better. To understand better, I want to understand the buy-in and input from different levels of staff, especially those who are going to implement. We are going to the trouble of creating these goals, not to create yet one more high-stakes system within our own school district to be a cost to our district. We are trying to work together with the district and the board so that we have something that drives the real work we want done for kids. And I think the thing that's been largely absent in that is the buy-in and the participation and the expertise of stakeholders feeding into it and then leveraging and using it. So for me, that piece is critical for me to be able to approve this. Otherwise, I feel like it's just one more tax on our system. And I don't want that. I want something that drives and helps energize our system. The second thing for me that is a big thing that I want to understand is we have a promise to our community to advance a whole set of commitments around equity. We said that instead of having multiple plans, we would make sure that those commitments, that progress on those commitments was always mapped into our annual plan. And we wanted to really get that going this year and next. And I'm not sure I see the evidence of that. In fact, I don't see a lot about disproportionately impacted stakeholders, particularly our students, reflected in these goals. And I want to make sure, like, maybe it's there, but I can't see it. It needs to show, because we all need to see how we're going to advance that piece. The next things are more granular, and they talk about particular groups of kids. So first, I think this notion of accelerated proficiency and pre-testing may be getting in our own way. I'm concerned about how we're talking about it. On the one hand, when we dig in deep and you give us like real depth, you explain how what our real goal is to get the kids learning at the grade level that they're in a way that keeps them moving with their classmates on pace and in a productive way. On the other hand, we're coming in with plans that are talking about assessing where they're at, talking about accelerated learning in ways that makes it sound like they have mountains to climb. But we don't want to talk about the fact that they have learning loss. We want to build on their strengths, but we're going to find out what their learning loss is and drive based on that. And it's quite dichotomous to me. And I wonder, would we do better to structure those goals around ensuring that kids are engaged and making progress at the appropriate grade level at the appropriate pace, and not about trying to recover. And I wonder if we've set up a barrier in our own system that's going to continue to take marginalized kids and keep them from climbing mountains because we created a mountain where maybe there was a molehill. So I wonder about restructuring that piece. It just seems to me not entirely productive as written.
The next piece for me is that I see all this stuff about academics, but I see nothing about 9th through 11th graders having academic growth. We have 3 goals in this area. The first 2 are only going to be measured and looked at with respect to K-8 because of tools that we happen to have. And the third applies to seniors graduating from high school, but not necessarily learning, just getting out of high school. And so for me, I'm kind of wondering how we're making sure that those 9th, 10th, and 11th graders are being served and taken care of. In that same spirit, I'm also looking at our tiers of support for our transitions. And when I say that, what I mean is we spend a lot of time and pay a lot of attention to K-6, 9, and 12 because they're big transition years. And I don't see anything huge here, but because of last year being so different, I wonder if we actually need a piece in the social emotional space that is committing very specifically to extra service for 1st, 7th, and 10th graders, especially 7th and 10th graders, because they had so little time on site with peers. And so they didn't get that transition experience where the link crew comes in and walks them through everything and loves them to death and supports them. So where are our supports for 1st, 7th, and 10th graders next year? And then I do wonder about some of the supports for the all kids supports under social emotional. So we know athletics and activities was a huge thing. We don't know that we really hit it in an equitable way, but we know it was huge for those who got it. Are we going to continue that investment and make sure it's equitable, like that more kids have access to it? And what about the thing that I'm hearing from teachers and all the sessions we hear from teachers? I keep hearing one of the good things about this year was increased touch with kids, increased ability to connect directly with them. What are we doing to facilitate deeper and more meaningful connections of teachers to small groups or individual kids as part of our tier 1 interventions? I just don't see that reflected in the goal. I think it's goal 1 here. So I don't know, that's very specific, but it's something I felt I had to call out. And let's see, all levels. Oh, and I also wondered, what's the impact of state testing, since we're going to have to do state testing in the fall, and we also want to do all this other assessment. And so back to that piece, I'm not sure that's all fleshed out, and we really should know how that fits with the state testing. And then kids disproportionately impacted. So I have other specifics, but that's my big reaction. Thank you for the work.
All right, so I'm going to move that we add the 10 minutes back on the time so that there's time for Director Watson, myself, and then a summary. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so that carries. Director Watson, do you want to make some comments?
Sure. I guess yeah. So, for student well-being, I think I'm just going to talk about the things that struck me. The first part, we were talking about sense of belonging, and we're talking about activities and inclusiveness, things to promote inclusiveness in the buildings. And I'm just wondering, do we know what works in those activities and things that we do to create an environment of inclusiveness? Meaning, like, have we looked at, I don't know, research from, anywhere in the country, or just based on schools that we have where that seems to really, we have a high sense of belonging? Like, what works in terms of those activities? That's what so that might help us focus on what to do instead of just sort of random activities. And then for academic growth, I just keep coming back to something that I think was stressing everybody out during the pandemic, because we kept talking about a year's worth of growth, which is kind of what we always want, but it was a pandemic year. And so I thought about the notion of a pandemic year of growth, which means when we streamlined, I understood that we streamlined all the standards so that it would just be not, trying not to be uninspiring, but just knowing that things were going to be rough, and just making sure that the students would have what they needed to progress to the next level, but maybe not every single thing that you would get in a normal year. So I'm wondering if we're thinking about that goal in terms of stress level, like what is a year's worth of growth? What is a pandemic year's worth of growth? And with the literacy and math, the math, I'm interested in the new curriculum, but I am wondering, we focus so much on that because we can measure that, but there is some thinking that you have to inspire the kids, right? So with math, sometimes you get inspired by science, or possibly even some of the projects they do in like human geography, and they do some statistical work and so forth. So I'm wondering about that. And then I think that Christine's points about equity throughout all of this are well taken. I think it's in the background there. I think I do see some of it in places, but I think she's right. We need to call it out so that we don't lose it. Staff engagement, I actually really like that new, I think it's new, definition of enthusiasm and motivated to take positive action for the organization and committed to stay. That's a good definition. So I would keep that, and I'm just trusting you to go on with the staff diversity hiring efforts. And then for FACE, I'm gonna say it again, family and community engagement. I really think that we need more than just a survey to measure that, because people, you know, we were measuring it on whether people would answer the survey or what the results on the survey, but there may be more measures than that, you know, in terms of, I don't know, showing up, doing things, kids feeling supported. I don't know. You can just be creative, but I feel like the survey isn't quite hitting it. That's what I think.
Okay, thank you. And then so for my comments, I'd say I think there are definitely individual components within the plan that resonated. I realize that it's a streamed down version and we are looking at the goals themselves and not looking at the how. I think there was a glimpse into one where we talked about using the STAR assessments. However, you know, the real work is being done in the schools, and I would just wonder if that is a comment saying that the through line that we believe by doing the work that we will see an impact in STAR, because it sounded a little bit like an issue that we have over time, that there's kind of two things of work. There's the work we do for the board, and then there's the real work. And it really shouldn't be work that we do for the board. It's work that we're doing for students and the educators that support them and the whole ecosystem that makes sure that our students are making progress. And there's progress that's monitored for that and a final report that's generated for those who are doing the work, and the board sees it in its oversight role. And so that was just a flag that was raised there that I would just like to make sure that it isn't, we're doing testing for the board. So if we're trying to determine where students are assessed, and I think other directors brought up that there's this balance between doing that with certain standardized assessments. So that's my comment on that. Along with that, I think there's individual components in the plan. My wondering is about the intersections, the connectedness within the work, especially with basically what's essentially goal 1 and goal 2, and then who's falling through the cracks. Is it the same students if we're hitting 60-70%? Is it the same 30% that's falling through? And especially there are certain measures that are this sort of historically marginalized or underserved populations, but history is now different. And so our students, especially as we emerge from the pandemic, which was a mental health crisis, which is what finally was able to tip us to coming back, that's unseen. And so there was a lot of talk about supports that we would be putting in place, tier 1 and 2 supports. However, perhaps the data needs to be presented and looked at in a different way. And then finally, I think some of the other directors touched on this. It's the inspiration. So what's missing, I think, in goal that we don't have goal 3 anymore. And for me, although it was a global competency digital literacy goal, I think I always thought of it as the embodiment of the vision, the creators of their future world. And so I'm hoping that as you go back into the next stage is to look at how we can embed that more deeply. So there's definitely an ask to embed the equity portion more deeply, but how do we put that forward? Because it may be a recovery year next year, but I believe it should not just be a recovery year. The inspiration is needed there. We talk about in the work, in having the high standards, in aligning grade level standards for students. That is how they thrive and feel connected, and their social emotional well-being is supported. And so having some overarching inspiration area so that we're not just recovering, but we are working to thrive. Like, I feel like we should be aiming to thrive and we recover in that process and go forward. But if we just set the bar at recovery, I don't think that's what the Bellevue School District is about. And so I would just urge more there. So I'm not saying that's a deal breaker per se, but that would be what I am looking for in the next iteration. So I understand it's streamlined, but if that inspiration piece could be more fully developed, that would be nice. Anything else? I see some head nodding, so I just want to note that it's not just coming from me. So for those who can't see, there's a lot of head nodding. Any other comments? Yes, Director.
I think on that inspiration thing, there are plenty of opportunities to inject it here. Some of it is in that athletics and activities piece. Some of it is in the there were just several places where I think it could show up. So the support for kids in the transition spaces, there's just a lot of places where inspiration could be bigger. And also I think moving away from talking about things like the basics or catching up, or like we sort of did it, but then we went back and kind of undid it by talking about accelerated learning as if there's this mountain to climb. And what's the inspiration to be with the grade level work that you're at, and how is that exciting and relevant and not just a slog? So
I would just say that the point about also identifying what students gained and what they might, as well as educators might want to see, kind of, I guess, us making more of, leaning into, supporting, whatever verb one might want to choose, does go with that sort of notion of don't focus only on loss and capturing through some delta a gap that you identify, but also consider if one can then build on something that was discovered in the pandemic that is actually a source of inspiration. So I think there is some alignment.
All right, so thank you. And then I made my comments on student engagement earlier, and I think that to just hone in that one more point about the intersections of the work, I think are important, and that idea that in the work, high expectations, that's how we bring students along, because sometimes we hear there's this choice, like I can only do this, and therefore then I don't teach those standards because I'm concerned about doing this part. And so how do we ensure that the work is a totality for the student and that we're achieving on various fronts? It's not a choice of one or the other in a given piece of time. So that brings us to the end of our time. Superintendent Collins, did you want to summarize at this point? Do you want to just take it back and then maybe we find time in the next meeting? I know that you gave us a timeline, and so there's plenty of time in July, theoretically.
Yes, it'll come quick. I do want to make a couple of comments. First of all, I want to assure you that we would be utilizing STAR even if it wasn't part of a board report, or even if board reports didn't exist, we do need a way for universally screening our students and having some information to go to the next step at the classroom level. So that information is important. We're not just doing that for board reporting. So I want to assure you of that. And I also want to assure you that when you asked about kids falling through the crack and that our students are emerging from the pandemic with mental health crises that we have not seen and that may still go unseen. And some of the tools that we have been using in identifying student needs in that area have revealed some issues for students that we otherwise would never have known. So we are finding that some of these new tools that we're trying are helping us identify and unearth some things that kids have been suffering with even pre-pandemic that we may not have known about because they surface in such silent ways. And then this whole idea of inspiration, I can't wait to move to a reimagine and inspirational mode. And I think this work in terms of recovery is super important. I don't want to minimize that. But by allowing us to streamline those and be really focused and do good work on the recovery, remember Melissa's visual of like the investment that we will invest high in the recovery and eventually we can lessen that investment, and then the opposite being true for the reimagine, that we will start low in those because we just don't have the system capacity to do some of that kind of work, but that behind the scenes we'll be doing some work and that we will be able to have greater investment and engagement around our reimagine. And our reimagine, remember, includes systemic equity, creators of the future world, looking at things like perhaps global competency, how we can use innovative and equitable assessments that I think are going to help answer a lot of the questions that we raised here today over the long term. And how do kids apply these skills of literacy and math in the real world and in these real world problems, just like the kids we heard from tonight, which I'm so glad that they came tonight and shared that with us, because that is our ultimate goal.
Thanks. Director Chu.
There's one other thing I forgot to mention. I just want to throw it out there. It doesn't need any comments. The standards-based grading work that we've committed to continuing and a whole set of goals around it, it's not showing up in here, and I don't know if that will be something that'll be coming with the tier 2 goals that we'll look at once this tier 1 stuff is underway. And you know, we had approved as a board that those could wait and come later. But if that is a huge investment for us in innovation in our district and in student empowerment in our district, and also in, you know, educator and equity investment, I wonder if it should show up at this level. I'm not sure. I just wanted to comment that it sounds like a major investment we're making and it's not showing up in our annual plan. And that's it.
Okay, so thanks. I was going to make a motion if.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to as well, but go ahead.
If we're done with this section, that maybe we consider moving to July 11.2 and possibly 0.3, 0.4, and 0.5 to our July meeting, but otherwise going forward with 11.1 and finishing out the rest of our agenda for tonight. Only just being mindful that we have people who have to leave, and I do think 11.1 is something we can and could get through.
Yes.
I don't believe we need to spend time on 11, 2, 3, and 5 tonight for sure. I think the purpose of the plans is so that the board directors all have a chance to look at the 3 committee plans that are drafts, consume them, come back with comments in July, and then give those comments. So we need time in July to talk about those. And then we don't pass those until the first meeting in August. But we do have to pass them, so we need time for the board to iterate. So as long as that's on the July agenda. And as far as the debrief of the educator and other groups that we met with, the comments, it's unfortunate to let that go to July, but I know for myself, I integrated many of the pieces of that work in tonight's comments, so I would be comfortable waiting to talk more about that until July.
Is that a second?
I'll take that as a second. Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. All right, motion carries. So 11.1.
Okay, so I will do my best to walk us through this. What I will not do is go line by line. What I would like to do is talk through the documents that I would ask you to consider pulling up. Why don't we start with the redraft of 1400. We can project that, or we can just talk through it. I think the key documents to be able to consider are, well, what we have is 1400p up projected. I'm looking for 1400, but.
So while we're waiting for that, I'm just going to say, because we're at the time for our meeting, I just want to thank staff for all the input and work that they've done to be able to put together the reports that we heard earlier, and then this annual plan review. And so I understand if people have to leave at this point, so just thank you. And then the board, we're essentially extending our time as well to encompass the motion that was made.
Okay, so let me just try to frame this. I take it as a given that you've all had a chance to read this, what's here. I mean, what you see here listed is you have the actual WASDA draft or version of 1400. You also have the memo, which is short and addresses kind of the two things that I thought you should understand in terms of what we're each seeking to do and why. And then you have the red lines and clean versions. So I think for the benefit of those listening as well as board members, 1400 as written was a variation that was adopted for the pandemic. And a key element of that I probably had the most focus on was the piece around public comment.
Director Serafin, can I just ask to clarify? I was not clear which of the versions, was it the recommendation one or the redraft one that was our prime focus? I read the recommendation one and then didn't see that many.
Yeah, well, it's 1400 has a recommendation clean and a recommendation with red line. Then 1400p has I used the word redraft versus recommendation, but one is for 1400p, one is for 1400, just the policy. So for each, you see.
I see that. And then we're doing both because it's our policy and procedure, but you're starting with the policy.
Correct.
Is that
so
what's
if we
up there? Okay, thanks.
If we step back and just ask what was the sort of most top of mind, I guess, awareness, we became more aware this past fall at a WASDA conference. I think many of our board directors learned that efforts that had been made in the past to ensure that our public comments were not sort of, I guess, used in a manner to diminish or disparage people, that all that good intent actually meant that we might be running afoul of law around First Amendment rights in terms of a school district context. So our goal was to ensure that we did not violate law, but we still maintain a level of what I will call civility, as well as ensure, back to the First Amendment piece, that we are not either in our written policy or certainly in practice doing anything that appears to encroach on what you would say. We want a place where viewpoint is not what impacts whether somebody's comment is heard or whether they are cut off, and there's not even the appearance of that. For that reason, it was wise for us to remove the language around don't say anything that's derogatory or disparaging, because that ultimately can look like a subjective assessment that's made by the board. So what we have is I essentially took the WASDA policy, and for those who don't know the acronym, it's Washington State Washington School Board Directors Association. We essentially took their draft language, and anywhere that it made sense, collapsed to that language. We snapped to that language and then modified 1400 where it was appropriate to reflect something that we had thought was important to our district. And so that's what you see. If you were to line it up next to the WASDA policy, most of it follows language from WASDA. But in some places, it just didn't make sense to keep their language where, for example, they say, if you're a school board of more than 5, here's what you should do. Or if there was just something that we hated from a past version of 1400, our policy thought this was important to write a certain way. So I also had a second lens of, are there things in 1400 that are just too long and really belong more appropriately in procedure? In a few cases, I cut and pasted something and pulled it out of policy and put it into procedure. Additionally, I went through an exercise where I may have taken out too much on school board visits, which were in procedure, and I put it back in, but I still tried to have it a little more streamlined so that the spirit of what I'd understood from Dr. Chu and Mr. Harrison from years past were reflected in 1400P, such as what is the goal when you have a school visit? It was there, but we weren't overly prescriptive. So, and being overly prescriptive is a problem, not just because it can be overwhelming, but also we know if policies are too long, people don't read them. So with all that preamble, I think if you were able to read the red line and clean versions and have feedback, I'd really like it tonight. If you didn't get a chance or you don't have the bandwidth to do it now, I'm hoping that context helps as you examine this. But if you just focus on public comment, it's helpful for people to know, I guess, 2 things right now. One, post-pandemic, we are no longer using the online system as a way to read out loud in our board meeting public comment. That was a triage measure we did for when our board meetings were not in person. We, the board, still read them, but it's not reflected obviously in 1400, but we've always read people's comments as they come in. What you do see in 1400 is a reflection of our original policy that says that public comments will generally be limited in time, generally 10 minutes, up to 30 minutes. It is up to the meeting chair, which we defined as either the president or vice president, or frankly, whoever is running the meeting based on the logistics of that night, that person has the prerogative and option to extend time if it's really needed. But generally, it's going to be 10 minutes. And we left as a TBD based on feedback here, whether that should be per person 3 minutes, 2 minutes, or 1 minute. And I think that may change and vary. So, a question to consider is, do we just want that time still in the policy? Do we want it completely moved into the procedure? But at a high level, we don't want to be updating this policy every time somebody decides, hey, we think it should never go to 30 minutes. So these are things we should consider. Should we just have the notion that we have a baseline and that will be announced at the beginning of the year, perhaps at the beginning of the meeting? Do we want that more in the procedure? These are things I think we could discuss tonight because I think that's probably the most crucial.
Okay, Director Chu.
I'm going to chime in really quick. Seema did an awesome job working through this and responding to feedback and still keeping it streamlined and consistent with WASDA, which I think were the 2 major goals, in addition to the ones she's already described about making this policy reflect the law more accurately. With the piece on the meetings, I think it's important that in policy that it be clear that we have a bound. Like, we don't want to have people arbitrarily bounding it. So we should decide collectively what the bounds are. And I think for the time per comment, I would prefer that be TBD at the discretion of the person chairing the meeting with some guidance. I mean, we can say, generally from no fewer than one, about 1 to 3 minutes a person. But I just would leave that there. And the other suggestion I would make is, in the spirit of making the policy and procedure most usable, our public and you know, they're not going to go to understand public comments to two different documents. It's a small thing. I think we want to keep it all in one, as much as it can be, in a shared space where the requirements are all together. And those are the things I'd say. And the reason I jumped in now is that I have a flight to catch. So I'm going to be leaving in just a minute. So when I go, I'll try not to disturb, but thank you for all the work. And that's really all I have for this.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much for the comments and partnership.
Yeah, so I'll just say I really appreciate Goalcom taking this on and Director Sheriff and all of your work to make it align with WASDA and take into account the changes. I'm just going to throw out a couple of small things. So one is school visits. We have changed it, so we're going to more of a 4-year cycle, except for middle schools with 3 years. So we probably want to have that reflected in there, or whether we actually have the years, but just keep that in mind that that part needs to be updated as well. With public comments, generally, we accept them via email. We also actually have a voicemail that we'd like to publicize more. I've been working to determine whether we can get that advertised more. It could be transcribed. People can provide comments in multiple languages. They already do that when they write in, and then we can put it through a translator. So really increasing the access for people in that space. And then we're doing the listening sessions that SIFE has set up. We've kind of done that in lieu of school visits in the spring. And perhaps that's something that we'll do for the fall as well. The executive committee is working on that. But my proposal would be to consider using the public comment quote time in the board meetings for something different. So because we have this opportunity now where we're receiving comments in other ways and are increasing our use of technology, increasing our outreach, that instead we use the time to have it as discussions of public input. Because as a board, we don't have an opportunity necessarily to determine how to respond. And I feel like that is perhaps a missing component. We have a lot of people writing in and then feel like potentially there's not transparency or the board isn't responding or listening. So we could repurpose the time and take 10 minutes to say, look, we got, number of comments on X and Y and this, and what did you think of that? What did you think of that? And we have a little discussion and then determine, yes, we should have a board response to that, or please, board coordinator or president, please write a response. And that would allow us to be actually having discussion about it. And public comment, and sometimes we get lots of emails that aren't labeled as public comment, but there's still things that we read and consume and use in our decision making. All of that would be part of the discussion, but we'd have various ways to collect that and not just listening in the time in the meeting.
I think I'd want to look over the WASDA model policy, because I think it does say you shall have public comment.
We do not need to. So the Open Public
I will
Meetings
go back
Act,
and look.
so the WASDA model policy may say that, but the Open Public Meetings Act, which actually governs our meeting, does not require public comment.
I mean, yeah, I'm referring to WASDA, which was recommended. But so interesting question then in terms of your input. So one thing you said, I just want to make sure I understand it. You said we are taking public comment online, but you're not suggesting that one of the things we do is go back to reading the ones that we received.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we wouldn't use meeting time for taking public comments. We would do that in a variety of other venues, and it could even be, so I don't know if we'd codify, but I could try to come 10 minutes early and listen to people and have interaction and even discussion. I think that's a lot of time people do. They come for answers. They want to have some sort of discussion. And even before this, our process, I think, is
very unsatisfying to many people.
Yes, agreed.
And so this is an opportunity for us to restructure it. Again, just, pandemic has provided us opportunities. People very rarely wrote public comment. They wrote to us, but public comment. That avenue has opened up tremendously for some. It's not probably a good avenue for others. And so we do need to work on it. So I don't want to just say, let's just rely on people emailing us, right? We were doing more outreach, and we should have the voicemail option, I think, should be promoted more. I think there are other ways to do it. I'm just saying that I think that public comment hasn't worked. And so to just codify something that's not working.
Can I ask one question? I just want to make sure I get this. When you were talking about the fact that we take public comment by email, you're not suggesting that we are still going through and posting them afterward. I mean, that was a huge amount of work. That's not, you're just suggesting that's a way for people to provide input. We get multiple avenues of input, and rather than just hear it and process it individually, why wouldn't we say these are the high level strands, or these are really intriguing recurring themes, let's discuss them in a dedicated time? Is that my understanding? Okay, so the one question I have is, to the extent that people find some, I guess I'll call it satisfaction in coming and knowing they can say something out loud to us and know that we heard them, what do we say to that? Because I do know that we keep saying, we read your emails, we read them, but people don't always feel that that's the case and or aren't assured it. So I see a level of clarity for people. Well, at least I know they heard what I had to say. So what would we do with that? And second, to the extent that we would be, I'll call it curating, what discussions we would have in public, what are your thoughts about sort of just the concern that we possibly seen as picking the ones that interest us versus are compelling for the community?
I just noticed I don't have a way to raise my hand.
Okay, do you want me to respond to that? Why don't I respond to that, and then you can go next.
Okay.
So we're increasing multiple ways for people to discuss with us. So in the listening sessions, for example, there's an opportunity. Going directly on our school visits, being available in the community. And there could be something, if other directors are interested, again, maybe that goes into procedure where one director commits to coming to the meeting 15 minutes early and is there to interact with the community directly. And so that there are opportunities, but it allows for actually more of a personalization than what occurs now. I'd like it to be considered. I can understand if it's different. It's just completely different than tweaking the margins of how much time. And so that's the first one. And then the second one, it did take hours and hours of time, especially when we got hundreds of comments and then we were trying to be really fair and we were counting them. And so there was, this is this number that were read so that it was even, but then people didn't necessarily believe that there were 10 times as many comments on one side than the other. And so they thought that there was selection bias going on when in fact that those were the actual numbers. So I think we can be very meticulous about it, and there will still be that perception potentially. But there are a range of us, and we can have, lists and reviews, and we do have a spreadsheet where they are tracked generally. So I think there are a number of ways to do that, and that's in unusual times. There are some weeks historically where we only had a handful. And then, even today we had fewer, and even the comments that we received online were fewer, or they were multiples of the same comment. So I think it is addressable overall. I mean, we want to make a system that works all of the time, but I think that we want to have a system that works well
most of the time. And right now we have a system that does not work well pretty much any of the time.
So if we take the gentleman tonight who came, the first person from whom we heard, who had a concern about his grandson's, I think, social studies experience, he would not have come in person. He would have submitted his comment online or by voicemail, and perhaps he would have been in a community engagement or other scenario. And then we would consider whether that was something for which we would have a discussion in our public comment time, and then he would get the, quote unquote answer there. I can see, like, I guess if I use that, I can see the value of him getting an answer if we happen to pick his topic because we thought it was an important one to address. But that would play out that direction. If it was selected, he'd actually get like a more answer rather than just feeling like, okay, I spoke, but I don't really know what they do about this or think about it.
Yeah, well, that's why currently when people write in, if they have a kind of operational question, because it's not a board, there is some about kind of direction, strategy, and overview, but some of the details around that is a staff answer. And so when that question is written in, then he does get a response. And right now we actually have a hole. Someone comes in and makes a statement here, and there isn't actually a system for following up. And so he made the effort to come, and he potentially gets less of an answer than if he had stayed home and done an email. However, if we potentially commit to having one of us be there earlier, and he comes and has a discussion, and I say, oh, there's someone I'd like you to meet who's over here, or and then is able to get a response. So that's what I'm saying is I feel like just setting the amount of time doesn't actually provide the support to our community, and we could design something, I think that's better. Director Watson.
Yeah, I don't know how to say it, but I actually really like the old system. I know you're saying it didn't work, but when I was, for the first number of years I was on the board, whenever you could tell like how the community felt about certain things. They'd show up in force, and then there wouldn't be enough time at the microphone, but we'd extend it to 30 minutes and everybody would get 3 minutes. And I would, be able to look people in the eye and see, just get a lot of nonverbal cues and verbal cues out of it. And I think people were frustrated because they didn't really, necessarily get an answer, but they did feel heard. And I think there was some value to that. I really do. And I think there may be some unseen sort of minefield into this, discussing a few problems and sort of maybe giving a sort of half-baked think out loud answer. I do think that we could get better about operationally, like when people have a concrete question that can be answered by staff at a meeting, we could just kind of try to make sure more that happened. And I certainly don't want to go back to reading things that were written in out loud. That was just something we had to do for the pandemic. But I was really hoping we'd go back to the original way, because I liked hearing from people in person.
Director Malif.
I don't have much to add around the public comment piece. It's been a pretty robust discussion, and I don't think there's a clear, good answer for it. Francine makes a lot of excellent points, but there is value to having people come up and stand in front of us and speak to the board, and sometimes to the rest of the room as well. With regard to the rest of the policy and procedure, you did a really great job, Seema. There's just a couple of things. As Francine noted, like, we've gotten a lot of things out of the pandemic in the sense of like abilities and such. And one of the things is around virtual meetings. So there's not really any discussion of that in here. In a lot of cases it doesn't need to be, but in one particular place, and there may be others that I missed, meeting recess and continuation. There's very specifically like notice of, like, you'll put notices on the door of the meeting room, and it's like, there's no door to a virtual meeting room. And we obviously did a lot of recess, if we don't finish the work, we recess the meeting a bunch. And we did that a lot this spring with all the work we were doing. But it's virtual. There's no door. So
that's all fair. Yeah. Those are refinement.
Yeah. So I think that's
sure.
in both things, and just little things like that.
For sure.
So just keeping it open so we're not.
But just making sure I have your input. So I guess to put it plainly, are you more kind of echoing Carolyn's point? Or are you more echoing Francine's? Because you said
regarding the public comment.
Yes.
I'm falling squarely on the fence on that one. I don't think that eliminating public comment time from the meeting, at least now, is a good move. I think it's something to consider long-term, at least as far as like building in a discussion or around like the feedback we've gotten. But that might be more board agenda stuff and less public comment stuff, right? Like building in time to discuss like community feedback.
Exactly.
Yet, as opposed to like taking out public comment. But that's, we already don't get to everything in our agendas. So I don't know how that would actually work in practice, but I don't think removing public comments from the meetings, physical people in the room giving public comment at least, is probably a good move, at least at this point.
That's something that I wondered as I was hearing you speak, Francine, was, and I get it, we don't ever have enough time, but like when we give our individual board updates or liaison updates, they're useful, but we could read those, and you've done a good job of trying to institute that. I wonder if we repurposed that and we came and said, tonight we're going to talk about 3 issues we've gotten a lot of feedback on. I think we'd have more latitude to pick the ones that we collectively want to if we're not taking away something. Because I do think there's just a visceral value or a desire for people to come and say, all right, I don't really know, I can't see what you do as you get things virtually, or did my voicemail ever hit your ears? And you're telling me you can't answer every email. And they know we can't, but at least I know you heard me. And I can see the value and importance of some of that. So I guess that's my own kind of reflexive reply to that idea. I see Carolyn's hand is up.
I just wanted to say, it just felt like democracy in action to me. We are sort of like the lowest level elected official, but it just felt like, I want to say like a New England town hall practically, where you could really come and face those people that you elected and tell them something. So I thought it was valuable.
Right, so let me make it clear. It's not that you can't have that point. It's that what it accomplishes right now, it's not working. And we also don't have a mechanism where we are responsive to our community in a way that I think people are seeking when they come to make the public comment. So just continuing to have that without another piece, I think is incomplete. So we can try to build in more time for discussion, and if people want to just, I think we would be having public comment. We would just be having it in more ways. And by that would be making a commitment to be having it in more ways, to have a board director be here in advance for a discussion, for having listening sessions, for having our forums, for the outreach we do in schools, having the voice. So all of these other ways we would make it richer. So it's not that we would be eliminating public comment. It would be public comment 2.0. It would be a richer way to engage with the public on multiple levels, where we go out and we don't expect that people can make it here at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. And I do want to point out that we had the 4 and the 6 o'clock, and that seems to have gotten lost. So I know that was only instituted a couple of years ago. So if we do have it, then the 6 o'clock time is helpful for some working families. It's also never like right at 6 o'clock, so that does make people
sometimes have to spend longer here. So I just feel like the way of doing public comment in the past is not equitable. And I would prefer we don't return to the same thing. If we want to have that then perhaps. But just tweaking the time, and if they talk for 1 minute or 2 minutes, we do it for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. I don't think that actually addresses what public comment should be. So I just want to make it clear. It sounded like there was, should we have public comment like this or not? With what I was suggesting. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that we do public comment in a better way than we've done it before.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I hear you. When I'm speaking public comment, I'm not saying that we subsume that with school visits and community engagement sessions. I think those are just other forms of outreach. I'm talking about the public comment that happens at the 4 o'clock or 6 o'clock hour, which can be, I will make sure is better explained back in the policy at the beginnings of our board, often at the beginning or at the 6 o'clock hour of our board meetings. I think one of the things you touched on, which I think could be easily remedied in our procedure, is that when people come in, even though they fill out the form, we can indicate on there, do you wish to have, like we could find a way to ensure, like you said, while they're here, if our decision is that we know exactly who on staff should be reaching out to them, we could get their contact information and try to deal with that in some way within a period of time from the board meeting. That could be one thing that we do so that there isn't that gap. But I tend to think of what you've said as an and not an or. Like maybe there's a way we can try to address what you're saying but I'm mainly just trying to make sure I take down what everybody says so that I can go back and work on a revision.
Okay, anything else on the policy? All right, if there are any other comments, then please submit them to Director Serafin so she can continue to work on that. When do you anticipate being ready for a second reading?
I assume July.
Okay, great. All right, so that brings us to, I think we've decided the motion was to push the rest of item 11 to the July meeting. We have director updates. I think we received one. Directors, if you do have updates, I know that I have some things that I would like to include. Please submit them to Ms. Gasparich, and then she can also let people know that there's additional things here, but I know I have a few closeout things for the year for my liaisonship, and I'll just announce that YouthLink has extended their deadline for new student and adult directors to June 30th. So if anyone's interested in applying, it's a tremendous opportunity for youth engagement. Does anybody else have anything?
I wrote mine in, but I just want to say out loud, Jubilee Reach is reinstating day of service. They had previously announced it to be canceled because they usually start in February. And in February, we couldn't promise we were going to be going into the schools in the fall, but now they are. So they're months behind in recruiting volunteers and getting set up. So please spread the word, because we talked about ways of celebrating being back in school, and it's a really fun way to get back into the buildings.
Okay, thank you. And then the rest of item 12.2 July meeting planning, there's a draft agenda there, but it's just the shell. It'll be that longer meeting where we're doing the workshop and the meeting combined. We had originally wanted to have more of an equity focus workshop. We had identified a number of different avenues because of staffing and breaks or vacations. We feel that a better workshop and the attention that topic deserves would be better served in the fall, and that will also come after the district equity report too, so we can build on the our board goals and kind of the next steps around that. So the July workshop will be, we have a new team member coming on board with Superintendent Jarvis,
And so we will be working on that. We will be reviewing our board evaluation. And we will have these additional items that we've moved to this area. Sorry, the 11.0 items to that meeting. And so that will be the crux of that meeting, and it will be pretty full, and that'll be fleshed out. You'll have that. If you have additional items that you want to bring, let us know. So the executive committee is working on that. We're also working on the school visit planning. We'll be looking at doing a CTE visit in the fall. Perhaps one of our sessions will be another round of listening sessions like we did this spring, and then our traditional school visits as school administration are settling in. So we want to give them a little bit more time this fall before we drop in. So if you have any suggestions, let me and Director Watson know. Anything else? Okay, so that brings us to item 13. We are adjourned.